The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 341 Death Approaching. Mario felt an interesting cocktail of emotions at being so bluntly accused. At first, he felt amused and that this tavern owner was very interesting. He'd been in Babylon for so long that he had pretty much established the list of people who he should not cross, and it had fewer people than one would assume. Then, however, he felt caution and apprehension. Lex had used some strange method to trap all the troublemakers, and Mario had not been able to sense what it was. But then his experienced mind got to work, and he calmed down, and in fact, looked at Lex in an admiring light. The very fact that Lex was coming to question him meant that he wasn't sure if Mario was involved in the first place. Otherwise, instead of asking, he would have directly acted. Moreover, if one carefully analyzed the situation, the timing of Mario's arrival was perfectly in time to watch this little performance, and it did seem too coincidental. No matter how the situation would have been resolved, it would have given Mario a deeper understanding of this mysterious young man who appeared out of nowhere. As for the matter of whether Mario really instigated the little situation that developed at the tavern or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Lex thought there was a possibility he did, and was now confronting him about it. What this told Mario was that Lex was a man of means, but he did not let his capability turn him arrogant. It was more beneficial to everyone if he directly confronted Mario and reached a resolution. This could even create room for some kind of cooperation in the future. "It does look suspicious, I'll admit," Mario said calmly, as if he was in no hurry to explain himself. "But I think, Lex, that you are both overestimating my deviousness, and the reputation of your tavern. I had not heard of this place until my son told me about it, which was this morning. I am only here for a drink, and maybe something to eat. After all, everyone knows, we have a lot of work to do once it gets dark. This town is full of people who require our protection." Lex did not respond immediately, and kept looking at Mario. He was trying to decide whether or not to believe this self-proclaimed protector. He scanned Mario for some extra information. Name, Mario Ricci. Age, 283. Sex, male. Cultivation details, nascent mid. Species, human. Condition, his body has accumulated a lot of injuries over the years that have not fully healed. While it is not a solution, a dip in the hot tub will improve his health. Remarks, the most valuable item on his body is his wedding ring. Such a devoted husband. And a cheapskate, not a target customer. After reading the remark, Lex took a look at Mario's ring in passing and, almost instantly, decided on his following line of action. His wedding ring was a simple silver band, with a single, small gem infused right in the middle. It did not, in fact, seem like much if one did not pay attention to it. Yet the small, incredibly clear gem was not a diamond. It was the same crystal from which Lex absorbed so much energy. This was an important clue for Lex on the wealth of this region, for the result of his queries for the past few days told him that there were no valuable resources in the area, and the main lines of trade in the region focused around items and treasures made by the Noel family using some secret family technique. This did not coincide with the information Lex got from the map. That, along with the fact that such a supposedly resource-rich area was under human control, told Lex that there must be something going on in the region in secret. When he came to that conclusion, he immediately stopped asking such questions openly, lest he attract any unnecessary attention. Now, finally, on Mayo's ring, he'd seen his first indication of the hidden wealth of this region. That meant that, regardless of whether Mario was involved in the current situation or not, Lex planned on letting him go. Moreover, he planned on improving relations with the man. "You're right," Lex finally said, relaxing his stance. "The tavern probably isn't as popular yet as I imagine. So let me do something about that." He got up from his seat and walked to the bar and, after having a short chat with Roan, came back with a round crystal glass filled with some kind of drink. "Here, have a glass, on the house," said Lex after putting it on the table. "If you'll excuse me, I have some other matters to attend to." With that he left, the glass on the table acting as the main attraction at this point. Mario and Elio exchanged a look. They didn't know what Lex had poured, but a thought entered both their minds. What if it was poisoned? Yet, after only a moment, Mario chuckled, and then chugged the glass. The taste was fruity, and the drink did not have the kick that Mario usually enjoyed. It was not something he would have normally liked, but before he could even make a comment, he felt a cooling sensation spread in his body from his stomach. He couldn't tell what it was doing, but it felt pleasant. He only nodded and signaled his son and his men to sit alongside him. Since they were already here, and had passed the hurdle of Lex's suspicion, there was no point in missing the upcoming show. The preceding wait ended up being much longer than expected, and it was only several hours later that a line of carriages arrived in front of the tavern. Hina and the rest remained frozen this entire time, but Lex had moved them to the middle of the hall to avoid blocking the door. After all, he had a business to run, despite what it seemed, with him constantly giving stuff away for free. 5 men dressed in the most uncomfortably formal suit Lex had ever seen walked into the room, followed closely by a mob of no doubt guards and goons. A quick scan revealed to Lex that the strongest of the group, despite the many followers, were the 5 men themselves, each in the nascent realm. When they saw the frozen Hina, as well as the rest, their expression worsened, but they said nothing yet. The entire hall had fallen silent at their entrance, and all eyes had fallen on them. There was a distinct lack of fear in those gazes, which annoyed the 5 gentlemen, but that was a matter for later. For now, they all focused on Lex, who had been waiting for their arrival. They had their aura on full display, like wild cats raising their hair to warn their enemies. Yet Lex was not bothered in the least, for inside the tavern, controlled by the system, he had the blind confidence of a billionaire. He did not wear his usual amicable smile, and left his face with a neutral expression. Somehow, though, he looked more intimidating than the 5 men. The silence continued until one of the men, a tall gentleman with a large and curly mustache, could wait no longer. "Do you know the trouble you're inviting for yourself, young man?" he asked with a stern voice. "Do you think this is a simple matter that will just go away?" "I definitely don't think this is a simple matter," Lex said, his voice extremely grave. He pointed at the mustached man and enveloped him in the same room that froze Hina. He then raised the finger, while at the same time controlling the room encasing the gentleman, lifting him up into the air. Then, ignoring the additional layer of shock and silence that had filled the room, he curled the finger towards himself, as if summoning the man. Naturally, he did not forget to control the room, and bring the man directly in front of himself. The man was actually taller than Lex, but he lowered the man until they could look each other in the eyes. "I am a simple tavern owner," Lex blatantly lied with an even tone. "We serve food and drink to the hungry and thirsty, and provide lodging to those who need a place to rest. Occasionally we provide entertainment and music, and more often than not we let our guests have a good time. A service we do not provide, however, is one where we let vermin harm the staff. Where I'm from, if a man comes into another man's home and assaults someone, it can be taken as a declaration of war. So that is why I have summoned you here today, to ask you. Shall I take this as an announcement of war?" Even if the 5 men wanted to answer, at that moment, they could not, for much like the force strapping Hina, and the force holding the mustached man in front of Lex, there was a force wrapped around their necks, squeezing. In the silence that followed Lex's question, they could hear death approaching. Chapter 342 Solving Problems. The question boomed like thunder in the 5 men's ears, especially because they had no idea why they were so helpless. They felt no pressure of a superior spiritual sense, and the usual resonance and disturbance created by formations was lacking. How were they supposed to know that the formation provided by the system was vastly superior to anything they had ever encountered, therefore it created no disturbance in the ambient spiritual energy? Half the spectators got goosebumps all over their bodies when they saw the confrontation, and the other half were giving each other dirty looks and continued drinking. Lex wasn't paying attention to that, though. He was looking the 5 men in the eyes. He had raised the stakes now, but it was also up to him to lower them. If he really did end up killing these people, it would create more problems for him, problems that he wanted to avoid. Of course, the possibility remains that these kids did not come with the intention of starting a war. Maybe they are just spoiled, entitled brats. Lex paused again, and this time, instead of the men, he paid attention to everyone else's reaction to what he was saying. For this next part, how much everyone believed his words were more important than the men he was threatening. Lex had some experience with wild, crazy rumors, and now it was time for him to create some on purpose. Maybe they're so used to not being punished for taking advantage of commoners that they never even considered it was anything wrong. Or maybe they know that, no matter what they do, they can get away with it. Speaking of which, it kind of reminds me of the serial killer roaming about. Suddenly, even the sailors who were laughing at the noble's misfortune froze, and then turned to Lex to listen to what he had to say. The moment they docked in this town, they heard about a crazy killer on the loose. This was not the kind of place they would want to stay, but considering the darkness, they did not have the opportunity to go elsewhere. Mario especially paid attention, for the killer had seriously affected him in more ways than most people realized. I heard that no one can catch the killer, and that no one even knows who it is. The killer, who had been killing non-stop every day, and apparently stopped the last couple of days, maybe to honor the presence of the Noel brothers. The more I think about it, the more it sounds like a bunch of noble kids having fun killing the common folk, and then using their influence to derail before it can point to them. Lex paused again to let his words settle in. This time he was no longer choking the 5 men, simply keeping them from speaking, but the dread they felt was the same. No matter what they did or how influential they became, they absolutely could not cross the Noel family. If word spread that they were using their authority to randomly kill people in the lands under the Noel family's protection, they would not survive. The sailors, who at this point were intoxicated, high or exhausted from work or just plain dumb, did not think for even a second deeper and accepted this new information as truth. Some were suddenly afraid of being silenced and started to leave, while others looked at the nobles with anger. The 5 gentlemen never considered the common folk as a threat, for they themselves were nascent realm cultivators. While such a realm was far more common here than on a planet like Earth, it was still not something casually reached. In this entire town, besides the 5 of them, who were only living here temporarily due to the darkness, only the mayor and Mario were in the nascent realm. So which is it? Are you here for war, or are you just so used to keeling over whenever you want that you never even considered that I might actually take issue with being your latest victim? At this point, he released the 5 gentlemen from his hold, allowing them the opportunity to respond. The mustached man nearly fell to his knees when the force holding him up disappeared, but he recovered quickly and took a few steps back to join his cohorts. The men were rubbing their neck, as if loosening their ties, and looked at Lex with newfound caution. This matter needed to be handled delicately. "God damn it," roared Anakin as he fell to his knees, cursing the very skies, and even the gods if they existed. He returned to the inn just in time to hear the latest rumor. Because of suspicious behavior on the part of the husband of the woman running the Lady Cosmos competition, a certain Brandon Morrison, the bikini portion of the competition had been cancelled. Then he cried, along with many other men, and even women, yet their dream would remain a dream. Even the happiness of his newfound wealth could not console him as he walked listlessly around the inn. He knew not where he was going, nor where he was. He only knew the name of his enemy, surname Morrison, first name Brandon. It was amidst his mindless wanderings that he ended up in an almost entirely remote area of the inn, save a group of 3 boys who sat around a circle table silently, their expressions grave. Suddenly he felt that they too knew his pain, and that if they shared with one another the stories of their idols, maybe the pain would be lessened. "Fret not, those who have dared to love," he said dramatically as he approached the 3 men. "Though our dreams have been sabotaged this time, there is always hope next year." He looked with gleaming eyes, expecting understanding and recognition amongst his fellow men. Instead, all he received were curious stares and silence, at least until one of them said, "He's lying. He probably has no hope for next year either." As if his heart had been pierced by an arrow, Anakin collapsed onto the ground, Indeed, his heart was cynical, and he did not believe there would be bikinis next time either. Raphael and Larry both looked towards Noman with anger and frustration. Were it not for the rules of the inn, they would have murdered Noman 100 times over. This human lie detector didn't know was pretty much an idiot, but for reasons they could not explain, he was immediately able to tell when someone around him lied. Moreover, every time he heard a lie, he would mumble as much under his breath, as if cultivators didn't have hearing sharp enough to pick up on it. The truth had yet to be revealed, but Raphael was completely unable to build a connection with Larry when they first met because Noman kept revealing his lies. At the same time, Larry felt frustrated because people kept trying to approach him, and Noman apparently knew more than he revealed, but only pointed out when others lied. In fact, even when Larry casually lied, Noman picked it up. Larry and Raphael both had secrets that could not be revealed to the world, and they needed to know how much Noman knew. But he never admitted to anything, yet kept pointing out lies. It was frustrating the hell out of him. It actually came to the point that the two of them, despite not knowing each other much, felt a sense of camaraderie in their hate for Noman. All right. I can see you all are having an important meeting and don't care about Lady Cosmos, said Anakin. I'll get out of your way and let you continue. After all, I'm just an ordinary, completely average person. It's all the same no matter where I go. Before Anakin could even turn around, however, he heard the same boy mumble, "He's lying." The wary Larry and Raphael suddenly looked towards Anakin, who was also looking suspiciously at Noman. Why did the situation keep getting worse? Hey, what do you mean, I'm lying? You're lying. Your mother is lying. I never lie. He's lying again, he mumbled, before speaking out loud, hey, there's no need to bring my mother into this, although she did indeed lie a lot. Instead of getting annoyed or frustrated, the way the other two did, Anakin stared at Noman for a moment before he got a brilliant idea. The sky is green, he said. He's lying, Noman mumbled. My name is James Pott. He's lying. I have an excellent business idea. He's actually telling the truth. I wonder what it is. Anakin grinned and patted Noman on the back. My friend, you and I are going to make a lot of money together. Anakin tried to lead Noman away, but Larry and Raphael immediately stopped him. Not so fast there, buddy. He's not going anywhere until we solve our situation. The extremely perceptive Anakin immediately guessed the intricacies between what happened with the three of them. With Noman's disposition, he was bound to create problems if left unmonitored. A part of him wondered how Noman had survived so long outside the inn. All of that was for later. For now. Why, of course, first come first serve. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anakin Indiana McLean, and in the field of solving problems, I am a master. Chapter 343 Reparations. I believe there has been a misunderstanding, one of the men said, taking off his top hat. Perhaps we could discuss this matter privately. Of the 5 men, this one showed the most composure and was likely the leader of the group. Lex simply nodded and led them to one of his 2 private rooms on the ground floor. So long as they were in the tavern, he did not mind wherever they talked. But, at the same time, he could not let them know that his confidence was limited to the tavern. While Lex himself maintained a psychological advantage, in the few short moments it took them to enter the room, the rest of the men also regained their composure. They were not inexperienced, nor did they share their children's spoiled and skewed worldviews. If they lacked aplomb, then they simply would not have made it this far in life. The only reason their mindset was disturbed earlier on in the first place was because they were facing something new and unexpected. Lex compared their mindsets to the original 5 nascent cultivators who ruled Earth. Other than Brandon, whose mental state could not be gauged using normal means, the rest were severely lacking. I believe we have not yet been introduced, said the leader, his voice calm and dignified. My name is Reginald Maud, head of the Shipwrights Association, owner of most of the shipyards in the locale and founder of the Naval Research and Engineering Facility. The rest also introduced themselves, one by one, as well as their occupations. They truly did have the right to be arrogant, for the industries under their command were both numerous and expansive. From construction to agriculture to medicine and more, every facet of a normal people's life in Babylon was directly or indirectly controlled by these men. Moreover, they did not fail to imply that they were not the only nobles in the area, just the nobles close to Babylon when the darkness arrived, causing them to take shelter here. Based on how one viewed it, their statement could be taken as a threat. Lex, however, was of the mind that he could use these 5 nobles to gain access to the rest. This was important to his plans, for while the inn was one way of gathering energy, he did not want to give up what he established in the crystal realm either. He could use them to gain a deeper understanding of the region and develop a network of his own. There were many uses he could think of off the top of his head. "I am Lex, the owner of the Midnight Tavern," he said simply. In this situation, a mysterious background was to his advantage. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lex. It is very unfortunate that our meeting was under such troubled circumstances, but I assure you that the intentions behind the incident were not so nefarious as they appear. It is with great dismay that I must confess that our children are somewhat unaccustomed to the ways of the world. But, at the end of the day, they are still just children, so it is not too late to educate them on proper decorum. I'm sure that between us, we can work something out to put this matter behind us, and look forward to a better working relationship." Lex did not respond immediately, and spent some time evaluating Reginald. The man was definitely formidable. Not everyone who achieved great success could so quickly adapt to being threatened, and even look for a way to resolve the situation without getting even for the threat. Naturally, there was still the possibility that Reginald was waiting till they saved the kids before plotting some revenge, but Lex didn't think it was likely. There was nothing to gain, and a lot to risk by further offending Lex. A business-minded man like Reginald would not do something that offered him no profit while leveraging his safety and stability. "If it really was just a simple mistake, and you are sincere in your attempt to make amends, then I see a simple solution that will satisfy everyone," said Lex slowly, as if testing them out. "You see, I have only recently opened this tavern, and am sorely understaffed. You, on the other hand, need your children to expand their worldviews, while at the same time disciplining them. This presents an opportunity for both of us. Everyone who was involved can come and work at my tavern for 1 week. The principal offender, of course, needs to be punished more than the rest, so he can work here for a month. This can both be a humbling experience for them, as well as reparations for their misbehavior. If you find this agreeable, they can start tomorrow." On the surface it seemed like Lex was letting the kids get away with a mild punishment as a favor to the 5 gentlemen, but in truth, by increasing the amount of contact they had, Lex was hoping to develop a deeper relationship. At the same time, by letting the kids return once, he showed them that he was not afraid of them reneging on the deal, thus making it seem that Lex's confidence was inherent, and had nothing to do with the tavern itself. During this time, Lex would also let the kids accidentally witness some of the more profound aspects of the tavern for them to report to their parents, further increasing the mystery behind Lex. Reginald did not delay, and immediately accepted Lex's offer. Lex unfroze the kids, allowing their parents to take them back home. This would give them time to recover and give the parents an opportunity to properly interview them about what actually happened. The serial killer licked the blood off his blade, relishing in the excitement of his latest kill. The darkness made it easier for him to perform his deeds in secret, but it would also speed up the decaying process. Soon people would discover the odd smell coming from the houses in this area, so he would have to find a new hunting ground. Maybe he should make use of the dark and attempt a more difficult hunt. He chuckled as he walked out of the house, wondering where to go next. He was already bored of the poverty-stricken portions of Babylon. Next, he would see if the rich bled differently from the poor. Midnight in the village. Miranda took in a deep breath as she looked through the curtains at the massive crowd in the auditorium. The turnout was good, but she didn't know if the results would be satisfactory either. The Earth Expo would last a month, and if they could get some solid backing or funding from some interstellar source, it would greatly speed up Earth's development. The number of cultivators had grown exponentially lately, but even with the new minor realm open, they could not hope to meet the demand for resources. Moreover, the minor realm would only remain open for another 6 months, after which they would have to be self-sufficient. Colonizing the rest of the planets in the solar system would greatly help in this endeavor. For that, though, they need better technology and resources. "Are you nervous?" asked Bernard, who stood behind her. He was one of the leaders of the Council of New Order, and was one of the main instigators behind deposing the previous 5 heads of the world. "I just hope we have something to offer. The more time I spend at the inn, the more I realize how insignificant Earth really is. So insignificant that a single beauty pageant from Earth has several planets completely hooked," he said in an amused voice. Bernard had a unique way of always finding opportunities in even the more dire circumstances. He was the one who kept the council from collapsing when the holographic woman Fernanda appeared, and the one who gained permission for this event from Fernando in the first place. "Do not fret," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "We have overcome many challenges, and will continue to do so. Our destiny cannot be contained by Earth. It is simply the launching pad for our stories. Next, we will find a way to repair your meridians, and then you can start to cultivate once again. With your lifespan expanded, you won't need to worry about the speed of our progress. We will have all the time in the universe." Hope and excitement flickered in her eyes, but she did not let it show on her face. When Miranda had work to do, she could not let anything else distract her. Currently, she had an expo to begin, and then only a month to secure everything they needed. Suppressing her excitement, as well as her nervousness, she walked through the curtain and onto the center stage. The opening ceremony for the first ever Interstellar Earth Expo had begun. Chapter 344 Party. Lex thought his problems would be over once the noblemen and their children left. But a new, unexpected problem cropped up. Big Ben, the newly engaged man who had spent the last few days sleeping, finally woke up. He was healthier and more energetic than he had ever been in his life, but he did not celebrate his newfound health for long. It did not take long for him to find out the crew he previously worked with had been disbanded, and since he was asleep at the time, he was not amongst the few who were immediately taken into employment by his previous captain's debtors. This was technically not Lex's problem, but he felt guilty for putting Big Ben in that state. Moreover, he was looking for workers, anyway. So he ended up hiring the big guy as his security. Big Ben seemed quite sociable and knew almost everyone who visited the tavern by name. While this was not a trait that made him intimidating, like Lex had imagined for his bouncer, sometimes this would work out even better. Besides, who said Lex was limited to a single guard? He could hire more if he found someone suitable. The one extremely important rule for his employment was that he couldn't drink while working. It was not Big Ben's fault, but in Lex's mind, he'd developed a reputation for knocking himself out a lot. The rest of the day passed calmly, and due to the darkness, Lex had Big Ben walk the triplets home. They insisted that they didn't need the escort, but Lex didn't change his mind. That night, Lex spent another few hours practicing arrays in the meditation room before eventually taking a break to watch some Lady Cosmos. It was the top 30 now, and Lex was fairly surprised to find a familiar face amongst them. It was Alyssa Harmony, the YouTuber who had won the Midnight Games. She was the only remaining contestant from Earth and had the backing of the entire planet. The remaining contestants weren't any weaker in terms of support either. One in particular, Lex noticed, seemed to get a lot of support from the Midnight and staff members. Her name was Haley, and her charm seemed to have infected quite a few. Well, Lex couldn't exactly say he didn't understand the appeal of a beautiful woman with wings. As someone who had watched a lot of anime, he knew that she may have even stolen some supporters from Earth. He asked Mary and learned that the inn's barber, Harry Styles, had developed a relationship with her. They had left many things unsaid, and had not made anything official, as for now, both of them were completely focused on the competition. Regardless, all the staff from the Midnight Inn silently supported the duo. In fact, they had to be extra careful about supporting her silently, because if word spread that the inn staff had a favorite, it might influence others. Lex was at first surprised when he heard the news. Then he sighed. It seemed more and more couples would be coming to the inn, while he had more or less firmly cemented his position as forever alone. He briefly recalled his last girlfriend, who also happened to be his first girlfriend. He was not madly in love with her or anything, nor did he miss her, but watching his staff start dating while the noble innkeeper himself remained single. Egg. Lex ruffled his hair and quickly shook off such thoughts. After that, Lex totally did not go to the bar and pour himself a drink. It was even more impossible that he directly chugged the bottle and quickly threw himself in bed, leaving the poured glass on the countertop. It was simply false if one were to say that the following night Lex suffered from countless nightmares. In the morning, for reasons completely unrelated to anything that had happened the prior day, Lex had a ridiculous headache. Fortunately, he had the perfect solution. He took a dip in the hot tub and allowed himself to relax while he scanned the inn. Either consciously or unconsciously, he avoided the Lady Cosmos competition in his scan. Eventually, his curiosity landed on his new workers for the greenhouse, the rabbits. He scanned a random one to see what he could learn. Name: Maradona Leopold Agnieszka. Age: 0. Sex: male. Cultivation details: chi training. Species: Niberian rabbits. Bloodline: wild root ravager. Condition: a newborn rabbit that was born at the inn. It is a pure creature born without malice, but should malice enter its heart, its bloodline will mutate. Remarks: prepare yourself for a rabbit infestation. Lex told Mary to inquire about the details of the bloodline and let him know what was special about it. If it had attracted the turtle's attention, then it probably was pretty good. Done with that, he went to the main hall. It was still dark out, which meant that, besides the sailors who were living at the tavern, no one else had come. Even they had limited what they ordered, and only stuck to ordering meals, for no one knew how long they would have to live in the dark. Lex didn't mind though, for the margins on his more common drinks and food were so ridiculously low that it effectively made no real contribution towards his total MP. It was just enough to break even and pay all his employees. The real source of income for the tavern would be the more exotic drinks, and when he could occasionally let guests into the backyard. Unfortunately, as much as he wanted to let people into the backyard randomly, the services were not cheap and could not be afforded by everyone. It was while Lex was ruminating on the tavern's finances that the main hall door opened, revealing Lex's latest workers. With Hina in the lead, all the troublemakers from yesterday walked in one by one. The clothes they wore were very simple, with no frills or patterns of any kind, though the fabric was still the best. Still, you could tell how self-conscious they all were with their tiny, uncertain steps and the way they dared to only look down, and refused to examine the room. It was already a large contrast from yesterday. Lex, however, did not take too long to observe them, and completely treated them like actual new employees. So tell me, what kind of experience do you have so that I can assign you the appropriate tasks? I take it that none of you know how to cook, am I right? What about scrubbing? Has anyone scrubbed the floor before? With a weak, almost inaudible sigh, Farty stepped out of the Noel Manor. There was no carriage for him to take, nor were there any servants following him this time around. His father's reaction could have been said to be mild this time around, for there was no screaming, yelling, or throwing him to join the armies to fight off the abominations of the dark. At the same time, it could be said to be extremely severe. All he said was that Farty was a man now, and obviously had his own thoughts on how he should live his life. As such, he should no longer burden himself with the responsibilities and expectations that came with the Noel name. His family name was stripped from him, and he was made to leave with nothing but the clothes on his back. The only glimmer of hope he was given to return was that if he made some exceptional contributions to the family, he would be allowed to appeal his expulsion. Such a punishment was already severe enough, but out in the dark, he would be exposed to the harshest evils that the Crystal Realm had until he found the refuge of another settlement. But one should not assume that the manor was nearby to other towns, based on how quickly they arrived from Babylon. Not only was the carriage special, so was the beast pulling it. To make matters worse, Farty didn't really know the way to any of the nearby towns either. After all, he always traveled by carriage, so why would he need to learn the routes? The pale man chuckled to himself as he started walking. In the manor, his brother, sister, and mother watched him walk out of sight. As much as they wanted to protest, they could not. Farty truly had been too willful this time around, and it was not just a matter of honor or disgrace anymore. The family his former fiancée was from was too formidable. If they didn't satisfy them by punishing Farty sufficiently, then the entire Noel family would be threatened. Farty, who somewhat expected a harsh outcome, quickly regained his energy for a few minutes. He forced himself to smile and said loudly, "From now on, my name is Farty Party." After a few moments, he groaned and gave up that idea. He had to think of a better name. "I need a drink," he said, as his hand pierced through the head of a creature beginning to take form from mist. Suddenly he recalled the tavern he had recently visited, and decided to go there. There was just one problem. He recalled neither the name of the tavern or the town it was in. This would take a while. Chapter 345 More Guests. There was an awkward silence in the hall, following Lex's questions. Well, this much was to be expected. He more or less knew that these noble-born kids who had been spoiled rotten would have never even perceived that they would ever need to do such things. However, what Lex didn't know was that he still overestimated them. Let alone have experience in them, this was the first time they had ever heard of such chores. Scrub the floor? Clean windows? Wash dirty dishes? Were these things that actually had to be done? "I have a lot of experience overseeing groceries." "I can help with that," said one of them weakly. Only he knew that the extent of his experience was borrowing from his father's warehouses, without showing any discrepancies. Unfortunately for him, that was one of the departments that the system handled for Lex, and since he had more or less given up pretending to be ordinary, he did not need to put up that front. I've hosted a few orchestras." "I can probably arrange good entertainment," said another. "I can probably source excellent wine." "I can. I have." Once they started, they went on a roll, but almost all of their experiences were utterly useless to Lex. In the end, Lex decided to give them the absolutely most basic jobs, making it more difficult for them to mess up. "Stop, all of you, just stop," Lex said, hushing their attempts to list their skills and experience. "I'll give you all simple tasks, but I doubt you'll be able to master them, so we will treat today as training. Training days won't count towards your week-long punishment, so I suggest you pick up your tasks as soon as possible." All of them, except the one who knew an orchestra, and the original offender who assaulted Nini, were tasked with various cleaning duties, from cleaning rooms, taking out trash, making the bed, clearing the kitchen, washing dishes, and more. The triplets and Rick were tasked with teaching them and overseeing their duty. He had to say, he was actually quite satisfied with how hard the girls worked, and was actually planning on increasing their salary right from the beginning. Currently, they were each being paid 1 silver coin each for a week's work, and he planned on doubling it. As for the 2 remaining miscreants, Lex was actually quite interested in arranging a musician to visit the tavern regularly, so he tasked the one who arranged orchestras to find him a musician willing to play at his tavern. Lex would then see how well the musician performed. As for the guy who tried assaulting Nini, Lex had him scrubbing the main hall floor with nothing but a towel rag. That would be his only duty for the entire week, and Lex had no intentions of letting him take breaks or clean half-heartedly. Besides that, today Betty, Big Ben's wife, would be in charge of the cooking. She applied for the position when Big Ben was hired here, and Lex said that he would decide based on her performance. A few others were also scheduled to come today to interview for various positions. It would be a full day. Although it was not cold, Anakin folded his cashmere scarf one of the times he stole inside his velvet coat and buttoned up. He picked the gold-embossed smoking pipe from his mouth and blew out some smoke into the wind. With his free hand, he reached into his coat pocket and lifted the jewel-encrusted pocket watch and checked the time. His latest business associates were late, and he could not really tell by how much because his pocket watch had no batteries in it, which annoyed him. He slid the watch back in his pocket, put the pipe back in his mouth, and continued to smoke. He did not mind his associates being late, for the Lady Cosmos competition was on break. The contestants needed to replenish their strength and be completely rejuvenated for the last portion of the event. Therefore, he really had nothing else to do. It was not his intention, but circumstances forced him to relax in decadent luxury. He did not have to wait much longer though, as the three men he was waiting for quickly entered his sight. To be specific, they didn't really agree to work with him, but he told them where to find him when they could not figure out a solution on their own. Eventually, despite their reluctance, they ended up coming here. To be clear, Noman had no issue he wanted to resolve, but no one else dared let him roam free and unsupervised. After all, if he truly knew their secrets, or at least some of them, they would have too much to lose. He was, however, mildly interested in the business opportunity Anakin mentioned, for he wasn't lying when he said it. "Gentlemen, I see you've finally decided to avail my services," Anakin said in an extremely practiced manner. "Before I tell you the solution to your problems, and guide you through them, I have prepared a small contract. I believe we'll be able to enact it through the guild room. You can read it at your leisure. It's just the basics, really. I'll accept a 1,000 MP payment from each of you, up front, and you'll share any expenses incurred during the resolution process on my behalf." The three men glared at him angrily, but Anakin was immune to any such looks. He was a self-made man, so even when he gained a lot of wealth, he kept an eye out for more opportunities. "What assurance do we have that you'll actually resolve the problem?" asked Raphael. "Moreover, how will you ensure that this one never interferes with my business again?" he asked, pointing towards Noman. "Even if the problem is resolved now, if he keeps going around spouting nonsense around me, it'll affect my business. For the resolution, you have no choice but to trust me. As for future encounters, I believe Mr. Butt and I will be business partners in the near future, so you won't need to worry. I'll make sure he no longer shares his gift with anyone for free." The rest grumbled but, eventually, gave in and signed the contract. Pleased with the small fortune he just made for himself, Anakin took a moment to dwell in his accomplishment, before he became serious. He had the trio follow him until he brought them to a building at the inn they'd never seen before. "Gentlemen, the building behind me is like none other. It is an exclusive feature of the Midnight Inn and is known as the Chamber of Secrets. Within it, you can deposit any knowledge you have to store, effectively removing it from your brain. Moreover, at the time of the deposit, you can set the required conditions to reclaim the secrets. So, to resolve your situation, you can openly ask each other any questions you need to relieve your concerns. Once you're convinced, everyone in the know can go into the chamber and directly deposit all sensitive information related to each other, with the condition that it cannot be retrieved unless all three of you agree. Naturally, you can skip the sharing process and directly go and deposit the secrets, but where's the fun in that?" For a moment, everyone was dumbstruck. Did they just pay 1,000 MP to learn about something they could have found out for free? No wonder there was a no-refund clause in the contract. Lex was in the kitchen trying the soup Betty made, which was really very good, when a sudden ruckus from the main hall attracted his attention. There were multiple voices yelling and a woman screaming desperately above them all. Lex's heart dropped, and he suddenly thought of the serial killer on the loose. He bolted to the hall, ready for a fight, but the sight that awaited him was not of a murder, but of a family with many small children. The mother, who had a baby strapped to her chest and was holding several bags, kept the main door open using her body while 4 prepubescent children ran in the hall. A couple of older kids, teenagers seemingly, trudged in as well, over-encumbered with bags and boxes, barely able to see where they were going. Outside, there were a series of carriages and more families disembarking. There were numerous kids, the source of most of the yelling, and several mothers as well, trying to rein in the kids. "Excuse me," a man yelled over the noise, finally attracting Lex's attention. The man looked battle-weary, though maybe that was just the result of the many kids. Do you have any rooms available? If you do, we'll take them all. We got lost in the darkness and barely made it to town. Most of the other places we've run across so far are full up, with everyone waiting for the darkness to pass. If you can fit us all in, I'll pay extra. Before Lex could reply to the man, one of the kids ran headfirst into the bar and started crying, attracting the man's attention. Then another one puked. Chapter 346 Daycare. Lex had seen the hell of battle, but this was a kind of anarchy he had never beheld. If only things had ended with one kid crying and one vomiting, it would not have been so bad. But, as if inspired by the first child, every kid in the vicinity started crying. Some kids who were still outside, and had not yet entered the tavern, also began to cry. But the crying was independent of running, as they continued to do both actions separately. Even the kids who vomited started crying and running, leaving tracks behind him. "George, make them stop," yelled a woman from outside. "I'm trying," responded the man who had been talking to Lex. But between checking up on one kid's wound and tapping another on the back, trying to calm them down, he was incapable of reaching the one, leaving a trail across the hall. The teenagers ran after that one kid, but he seemed adept at dodging, and navigated the hall like a battlefield, narrowly avoiding capture. But all was not lost, for in the moment right before the mother collapsed, like angels sent from the heavens for salvation, the triplets swept in. With a practiced hand, Naki grabbed the evasion expert directly by the ear, though she did not pull, and only used it as a threat to hold him in place. Nami used a napkin to cover the wounded child's bleeding nose, and started complimenting him on his bravery. Nanny rubbed her cold hand across a crying child's neck and massaged him. The cold hand grasped the child's attention, and the massage soothed it. Showing the prowess of sisters with many siblings, they pacified the hurricane into a gentle wind. "We only have 2 rooms remaining," Lex informed the weary man. Before even responding to Lex, he looked towards the exit and yelled, "2 families disembark. The rest, keep searching." He waited a moment for confirmation, before he turned towards Lex and began listing his requirements. "We're going to need mattresses in both rooms, and extra blankets and pillows. Also a hot shower if you have it, and food, for 16 people. Also, if you can send someone for a doctor, some of us have injuries. Also, if you have someone to carry the luggage. Also, we'll take the food in our rooms. Also, can you send someone for the news? We've been in the wilderness for too long." The man paused, as if to question if he had forgotten anything, and then asked, "Oh yeah, how much for the rooms?" 1 MP per night, Lex responded, taking the man by surprise. "That's a little expensive for a tavern, isn't it? You taking advantage of the fact that it's dark out? You know, that's illegal. If I report you, you can get in trouble. That's the price, whether it's light out or dark. Our prices are fixed, they never change." The man was skeptical, but he couldn't take the risk of losing these rooms, so he simply accepted it. Lex had his latest workers, the miscreants who were causing trouble at the tavern, to carry all the bags up to the last 2 remaining rooms, which happened to be on the highest floor. Betty began preparing meals for the new families, and Lex sent out Rick to find a doctor, as well as Roland to bring the latest news. Lex himself temporarily retired to his own room during this, because he had something indescribably important to do. "Mary, we need to start a daycare service," Lex said very gravely. "What?" she asked, confused. She had been preoccupied with other things, and it took her a moment to absorb what Lex said. "A daycare service? Why?" "Just trust me on this," he said, as he recalled the look in the eyes of the parents he just saw. "This is imperative, and will take priority for now. I want the entire planning team to come together and design a place for kids. Design it keeping various age ranges in mind, and provide a large range of activities. In fact, I want you to work with them as well. You're familiar with my authority and all that I can do now, so take full advantage of it while designing it. Make it so that not only are we taking care of the kids, we're helping them in some way too. It's fine if you have to design different areas for different races, but I want it to be great. We can even use some of those rabbits working at the greenhouse as caretakers, they seem friendly enough. Give me an update when you've made some progress. Sure, she replied, still confused about how Lex was behaving. Only after she gave an affirmative response did Lex allow himself to relax. Yes, the tavern really was a good idea. It was giving him new perspectives already, and would be good exposure for him on the finer details of hospitality. He thought about returning to the hall, but he trembled, and decided to cultivate instead. Recently, he had discovered a new way to cultivate that would speed up the process. Back when he was in chi training, he rubbed a special oil all over his body to help with cultivation. For the foundation realm, he came up with a method on his own. He went to the bathroom attached to the room he made for himself and approached the bathtub. He summoned a bottle of expensive chilled tea, and began pouring it in the tub. A single bottle was 150 MP, a sky-high price for the average foundation realm cultivator. It was, however, worth it because this tea was very rich in spiritual energy, which was extremely easy to absorb. As a true path cultivator, Lex's requirements for energy were much higher, so the benefit from drinking it wasn't so obvious. So he planned on submerging himself in it, and then cultivating. Theoretically, it should boost his cultivation speed. He had to spend nearly 23,000 MP before he filled the bathtub completely. Lex quickly stripped before submerging himself, as if the tea warmed up it would lose much of its effects. He closed his eyes and began cultivating. Hopefully this would work, or else he'd have to use even more expensive stuff. The town of Babylon, like many other towns and cities, had a very extensive formation in place to light it up whenever the darkness fell. Maintaining and protecting this formation was extremely important, as it was linked to the very survival of the town. After all, periods of darkness could last anywhere from a few days to weeks, months, or even, sometimes, years. The formation lit up not only the boundary wall, as well as the lighthouse near the harbor, but every street, building, and any other area within the town. It was so extensive that, functionally speaking, the town was just as well lit during the dark as it was when there was light. Only looking up into the empty sky would remind them that it was still dark, and dangers were all about. Such thorough preparations were absolutely essential, though, for the town's survival. While it was filled with cultivators, if they had to rely on themselves, the town would be able to survive at most 1 week before enemies became too powerful. That wasn't to say the town would be completely destroyed after that, but a majority of the people who were weak, relatively speaking, would most likely die. This deadline was something that had been tried and tested over thousands of years, so everyone was familiar with it. Now, it had already been a few days since darkness fell, and it was approaching a week. The longer this went on, the more severe and serious the protection and surveillance on the formation there would be. But even the strongest protection was only as strong as its weakest part. The serial killer, who was sitting on top of a pile of corpses, was reading a document that described in detail the light formation, and all the important parts of it that needed extra protection. It was only natural that one of his victims should have such a document, for he was the deputy head of the constables in Babylon. He had been relentless in his search for the killer, so the killer decided to pay him a house call. This time, though, he had killed using poison. He had no other choice, as the targets this time were too strong for him to confront head-on. The fact that he was able to get his hands on poison strong enough to deal with the deputy spoke of his resourcefulness. But while he filled his kill quota for the day, being unable to cut living flesh or taste the blood of his prey left him unsatisfied. After all, he was crazy, but not stupid. He wouldn't drink poisoned blood. But his lust for blood had not been quenched, and that put him in an irritable mood. But that was okay, for this document had given him a new idea. He was really enjoying this darkness, and he wanted more of it. Chapter 347 Waves of Pleasure. It was well into the night when Lex finished his cultivation session. His body felt slightly bloated, but that was excusable when one considered that he had basically absorbed a tub worth of tea into his body. Or, more specifically, he had absorbed the energy contained within that tea into his body. the sense of bloating was both good and bad. It was good because it basically meant that Lex's estimate about using this particular tea was accurate, and all he needed to do was slightly reduce the amount of tea he used the next time. It was bad because cultivation was not a mindless process of absorbing energy. Each and every realm served a specific purpose, and cultivating within that realm had to adhere to the logic upon which that purpose was dictated. Qi training, for example, strengthened the body by absorbing qi, and prepared it to be able to absorb a stream of spiritual energy rather than individual strands of it. The foundation realm absorbed spiritual energy and, instead of strengthening the body, fused with it. The fusion process of spiritual energy with the cultivator's body was roughly divided into 3 different realms, which made the beginning, middle, and late stage of the foundation realm. The first stage was fusing spiritual energy in all the muscles, tissue, blood, fat, and other, relatively simpler parts of the body. The middle stage was fusing energy with the bones, and the final was fusing with all the organs. In essence, it was as simple as that. There was no higher or deeper meaning to it at all. At least, that was the case if your only purpose was to simply advance your base cultivation. As Lex had taken some courses teaching the basics of cultivation, he had a deeper understanding of it than what the regal embrace informed him of. After all, that was only a cultivation technique, and would not contain the deeper, more sophisticated intricacies of cultivation. A very simple explanation of this was that the process described previously only entailed the changes that took place in spiritual cultivation, and not in body and soul cultivation, as well as in the true path. Moreover, from the foundation realm onwards, cultivation began to be influenced by the sentience of the being cultivating. The explanation of cultivation was beginning to get abstract, and would continue to get even more complex with each successive realm, so comprehending exactly what it entailed correctly was very important. Simply stated, the purpose of the foundation realm was to build a foundation for the cultivator to be able to achieve higher realms of cultivation. By having the body fuse with spirit energy, it used the body itself as a foundation for a higher, more concentrated energy used during higher realms. Similarly, in body cultivation, it strengthened the vitality of the body itself to be able to accommodate a body that would be drastically stronger, maybe even larger, and much more complex. For the soul, it was even simpler, making it stronger in every sense, lessening its dependence on the body, and allowing the cultivator to tap into more soul energy. The true path achieved all of these in a more comprehensive and unified manner, ensuring that the changes all complemented one another. But that left the question of what role sentience played in all this. In theory and in practice, this was all that was needed for a human to raise his or her cultivation. If that was the case, and the act of cultivation was so simple as to simply follow a set pattern of actions to achieve ascendance, then surely sentience didn't matter at all. In fact, one could use various technologies or techniques to put an unlimited number of humans into suspended animation, and then have their bodies perform the required actions. That way, it would be like going to sleep, and when you wake up, your cultivation would be much higher, without requiring you to put in any effort. Not only was this something many scientists had theorized, many organizations had put it into practice. Even the rascals that attacked the inn had gone through a similar process, to some extent. But while on paper, this achieved results, the end product would always be cultivators who would always be the weakest within their own realm. No amount of resources would ever make them apex predators within the same realm. They would only be good for hunting lower-level enemies. This was precisely because, from the foundation realm onwards, it was not just the cultivation technique that determined your strength, but you as a person. While the cultivation technique established the foundation for higher realms, the cultivator himself had to set the foundation for what kind of cultivator he or she wanted to be. What exactly that meant was something Lex had not been taught. All he was told was that it touched upon certain traits of cultivation that were best he did not dwell on for now. He had, however, been guided on how he could develop his foundation as a cultivator. It was fairly simple. It was to select one, or a few fields which interested him and spend considerable time on it until he achieved what he considered decent progress. There was no metric for this other than his own self-evaluation. For example, a painter could paint, a writer could write, a marksman could practice his aim, a fighter could refine his technique, and so on. For himself, predictably, Lex had chosen to practice a raise. Anyway, Lex's thoughts had gone on a tangent. In summary, the reason why feeling bloated was not good was that he could not force his foundation to form. It had to be a natural process, and any excessive pressure could end up having the opposite effects. Lex took a warm shower once he was done, and decided to check up on the inn and tavern. To his surprise, despite the late hour, there were still a few people sitting in the hall. Specifically, it was all the adults from the two families that had moved in today. They were not talking, or eating, or even drinking. They were simply sitting in silence, allowing their weary bodies and minds to slowly recover. It was not just the kids that had caused Tem endless exertion, and drove them to the edge of sanity. It was the few days they spent in the darkness. Were it not for the fact that they had roads to follow, they would have never found a way to any town. During that time, they could not rest for even a moment, as they had to protect the carriages. Their families as well as the beasts pulling the carriages. Moreover, they were all in the Foundation realm, so they weren't exceptionally strong either. They were just a group of families who had timed their vacation poorly. Upon observing their exhausted faces, a sense of pity filled Lex's heart. He decided instantly to welcome his first guests into the tavern's backyard. Silently, and without attracting any attention, a new door appeared in one of the walls of the hall, very close to where the family sat. At first, nothing happened, for no one noticed anything at all. But, after a few minutes, the man who had previously talked to Lex, George, noticed something amiss. He looked beside him and saw a door he hadn't noticed before. For a moment he was confused, for he didn't recall there being a door here. But he attributed it to him being too tired or distracted to notice. But then, his wife saw him staring to the side and took a look as well. Was this always here? She asked as soon as the thought occurred in her head, bringing everyone's attention to it. I don't remember, but it must have been, right? Replied George. I wasn't paying attention. I'm still reeling from that medicine the doctor gave me. My stomach is still burning. I don't recall it, but then again, I wasn't paying attention. The conversation repeated itself a few times before George's wife stood up, deciding to sate her curiosity. Don't, said George. What if it's someone's room? I'll apologize, she replied offhandedly, and opened the door. What she saw caused her to tremble and weaken in the knees. A small, cozy wooden room with a couple of changing sectionals on the side appeared before her eyes. But what really caught her attention was the hot tub right in the center. Steamy mist was floating up the bubbling water, inviting her in to rest her weary bones, while a relaxing, soothing scent oozed out the door. The darkness had brought with it cold as well, but just the warm gush of wind that escaped the door seemed to drive the cold right out of her body. Mesmerized, she forgot to inform George. She even forgot to change her clothes. Before she knew what she was doing, she dipped herself in and a long, deep moan escaped her lips. She closed her eyes and rested her head on the edge of the tub. What husband? What kids? Right now, she forgot all of it and simply savored the waves of pleasure, washing through her body. Chapter 348 Sharing Secrets. Honey? George called out, confused. From his angle, he couldn't see into the room very well, so all he knew was that she simply entered the room with a look of reverence. He exchanged looks with the other couple, who were just as confused. Synchronously, they got up and walked towards the door, intrigued, and the moment they smelled the scent wafting through, they entered a trance almost. Their tired bodies, aching muscles, exhausted mind all gave in at the same time, and surrendered to the pleasant aroma. When they arrived, they didn't go through the same surprise as George's wife, mainly because they were already hooked. They did not notice at all when the door closed on its own behind them, and the entrance from the hall mysteriously vanished. Absent-mindedly, they approached the hot tub, and all got in, one by one, all forgetting to remove their clothes. A collective groan could be heard as they all got in, and the hot, healing water began working on their injured bodies. The two families could not be blamed for their state. They had just exited an incredibly high-stress period, so not only were they high-strung, but their bodies had undergone exertion they were completely not used to. The only reason the situation was not worse, and they had suffered no fatalities, was because the foul creatures formed early in the darkness were weak relatively speaking. Moreover, this was no ordinary hot tub. How could it be, when this was one of the services offered by the system? The hot tub was not a replacement for the recovery room or recovery pod, but it would definitely help the body relax and speed up its natural recovery. Moreover, the waters were mixed with healing and soothing concoctions that not only helped the body, but the spirit as well. The waves of pleasure that were washing over them was actually all the knots in their muscles being untied, and their bodies rapidly recovering. While this would not drastically help them recover, for example, it won't fix broken bones, but it would bring the body into the optimal state to recover on its own. As if that wasn't enough, small dark waste started washing out of their pores, instantly evaporating under the water's purifying effects. While it could not perform the process thoroughly, the hot tub could purify the toxins they had accumulated in their bodies throughout their life. Once they were done, not only would their health improve, so would their cultivation. For 1 hour, the two families sat in the water in silence, letting their bodies be nourished by the magic waters. They reached a point, however, when they all suddenly felt that whatever process had been happening was complete, and staying in the water any longer would no longer help them. It was a subconscious thought, and they could not source where it had originated from, but they all had it at the same time. One by one, they exited the hot tub and took short, wobbly steps towards the door. Their wet clothes dried in a few steps, the water evaporating magically, as if it could not exist too far from the hot tub. When they exited the room, both the couples somehow exited into their respective rooms. It was magical, but for some reason, at the moment, none of them questioned it. The gentle aroma of the hot tub room seeped into their bedrooms, relaxing the numerous kids sleeping on mattresses, and pushing them into a deeper sleep. The parents, once again without changing, climbed into bed amongst the youngest of their children, and fell asleep instantly. It was a deep and dreamless sleep, letting their mind and body recover. The hot tub room disappeared as magically as it appeared, and there was no indication on whether the families would even remember it or just consider it a strange dream they all shared. In front of the Chamber of Secrets, Anakin, Larry, Raphael, and Noman once again gathered. Although Anakin had informed them about the function of the chamber, they were not completely satisfied. Each of them tested the room by depositing and recollecting small, inconsequential memories and testing each other on it. Once all of them had tried it out, and were satisfied with it, they decided on forming an agreement via the guild room that they would honestly answer each other's questions, and then deposit each other's secrets in the chamber, leaving only the memory of the surety that their own secrets or matters were secure. That left the matter for why Anakin was still amongst them. While he had no secret to share, for he truly was just an ordinary person adept at finding and using opportunities, he had convinced Noman that he would benefit greatly by following Anakin from then onwards. How he had done it was unknown to the rest, but Noman completely believed Anakin, and involved him in this matter as well. Thus the four of them signed the agreement and arrived at the chamber. Since it was so secure, they decided to exchange their secrets right inside the chamber. First up was Noman. Everyone was staring at him intently, making him slightly uncomfortable. He was also nervous because he had never shared his secret with anyone before, but at the same time, it also filled him with a strange sense of relief. "I was born with a special power," he said, scratching his cheek. "Whenever I hear or read a lie, I can instantly detect it. That is not to say that I automatically know or understand the truth. It just means that whenever I come across anything that has the intention to communicate anything so that it is perceived as anything but the truth, I can detect it. For example, if a person named Harry says to you that you can call him Adam, he is not lying. You, indeed, can call him Adam. But, if in saying that, his intention is not to say that you can call him that, but to make you believe his name is Adam, I can tell that he is lying. This ability of mine has no restrictions. It can detect lies in any format, and it does not matter how high or low someone's cultivation is. I have yet to see anyone who can hide from my ability." His short and simple dictation was followed by utter silence, as everyone absorbed the weight of everything he had just said. His ability was absolutely broken. Being able to detect lies, regardless of cultivation. In the right hands, or maybe even the wrong hands, this ability could wreak havoc. Of course, the premise was that it had to be someone smart enough to use the ability effectively. Anakin's eyes were gleaming as various thoughts ran through his mind, though his expression revealed nothing. Larry went next. He had none of the nervousness of Noman, and directly began his tale. "My family was an extremely wealthy family back on Earth, and owned several spirit stone mines. That made me extremely lucky, but I was also extremely unlucky because I was born without the ability to cultivate. Even the tiniest bit of spiritual energy would be poison to me, so regardless of the method or type of cultivation, I could not use it. But my fate changed one day when, in one of my family's mines, a unique treasure was born. The birth of the treasure caused a major disturbance in the spiritual energy of the region, and attracted a lot of attention. Many people attacked my family in secret, trying to uncover whatever was found. Many of my family members died to protect it. But the treasure ended up being completely inane to everyone other than me. As such, I got it, and after an expensive and dangerous surgery, my father had the treasure merge with my spine. It took a few years, but when my body finally acclimatized to it, I gained the ability to cultivate. But it was no longer ordinary cultivation. I could cultivate by absorbing new and various kinds of metals into my body. The rarer the metal, the greater it would boost my cultivation. But at the same time, the more I absorbed one kind of metal, the less it boosted my cultivation. At the same time, my body has developed an incredibly high affinity for metals, to the point where it's almost impossible to harm me with a metal weapon. A while back, I was being hunted on Earth, and I fell into an ambush. Someone shot me in the head. That should have been the end of my life, but instead of my brain blowing up from the bullet, it simply absorbed the bullet. I was still hurt a little, because I couldn't absorb the bullet fast enough, but the more metals I absorb, the stronger my body becomes. I was able to survive the shot, and quickly killed the ambusher. But I suspect someone knew, or somehow learned, about this unique treasure, and began targeting my family for it. They ignored me at first, because I was simply a mortal, but eventually, they must have realized something was wrong. I have been looking into this matter for a long time, but I cannot find out who the person hunting me is. At first, I thought it was someone from the Council of New Order, for only they would have the ability to target my family. But the matter seems more complicated than that. Everyone looked at Larry with interest and curiosity, but it could not garner the level of attention of Noman's secret. Larry did not regret this, for he was not competing for who had the deeper secret. Moreover, no one other than him understood how amazing his ability to cultivate using metals really was. Soon, he would enter the nascent level. Then he would return to Earth and get his revenge on whoever it was that was hunting them. Then, finally, they all looked at Raphael. It was his turn to share. Chapter 349: The Future. Now that Larry knew the truth behind Noman's random murmurs, he was truly anticipating what Raphael had to say. After all, he was extremely suspicious of anyone who tried to approach him randomly, and there was definitely some ulterior motive behind Raphael trying to befriend him. The man in question, Raphael, kept his cool. He was thinking exactly what and how much to share, as his secret was much wider, and had much more immediate repercussions than either of the other two. Before I begin, don't you think you should share a little something as well? If you have no secret to hide, how about a little about your life? Raphael was looking towards the nonchalant Anakin and, after his words registered, the rest looked towards him as well. It did seem a little unfair if he was the only one who shared nothing. Anakin only chuckled in response, but did not delay. My life is pretty straightforward. I grew up in a town called Springfield. My dad was a plumber and my mom worked at the local post office. We had a pretty good house my dad bought with some of his savings and money he inherited from my grandpa, so we had no debt to speak of. The American dream. I did pretty well on my SATs and even got a scholarship for college. Life was swell and boring. That's when things got messed up. The Council of New Order appeared, the world became strange, cultivators appeared, and I found a golden key to the inn. Well, since then, I've never looked back. It's an interesting life for me, or nothing at all. Oh, and one day randomly in my dream, some random old dude appeared and claimed I have a great affinity for the dark side. I have great affinity for darkness, and gave me a cultivation technique which I'm currently cultivating. He's telling the truth, Noman murmured absent-mindedly. Anakin's history was both surprising and unimpressive. Raphael had not heard of him in his previous life, so it was likely he never made any great achievements back then. But things were too different this time around, so it was hard to tell if it would be the same. Not bothering to comment on his story, Raphael cleared his throat and began. My name is Raphael Carter Bravi, and many years ago, I was struck by an accident. It destroyed my entire body. But that is only what happened on the surface, the truth of the matter is entirely different. He paused for a moment, as he thought back on the memories of his previous life. He remembered everything so vividly, every emotion, every ache, every hope, every moment of despair, all of it. It was that level of clarity that brought some doubt, for none of his other memories were so clear. The truth was something he would most likely never know, nor that it mattered, but for the first time, he could voice his suspicions. The truth is, I've actually traveled back in time from the future. My original life, my original timeline was vastly different from this one, yet at the same time, it was so similar. Everyone who existed in my original life exists now, and I was able to live and witness the history of Earth for a total of 134 years. The Earth in my original life was very different, and the war between the Council of New Order and the 5 nascent heads was also very different. When all was said and done, Earth was almost destroyed, and humans were brought to a fraction of their current population. He paused again, this time paying attention to Larry's disbelieving reaction. He waited for the subtle "he's telling the truth" murmur before he continued. So far, many of the things that were supposed to happen in my original timeline have already changed. Although I don't know why they changed, I strongly suspect it has something to do with the appearance of the golden keys for the Midnight Inn on Earth. But, while immediate disasters have been averted, there are more dangers ahead. I've already checked by various means that this timeline is mostly identical to my original one, and so I strongly believe that the troubles that lay ahead will still come, especially since they don't originate from Earth itself. So, to fight against these dangers and prepare for the worst, it has been my goal to find the strongest people in the future, and band them together so that we can work together to solve the situation. That is why I approached Larry, because he is supposed to become one of the strongest people on Earth in the future. He finally stopped, for the amount he had shared was enough to cover the contract they had signed. But, he knew, or rather, anticipated something, and it happened immediately in the next moment. He's telling the truth, but he's also hiding something. The truth is incomplete, said Noman, his voice filled with genuine wonder. Even with his vast experience, this was beyond anything he had ever encountered. Raphael sighed and said, well, actually, the thing is, I've been having some doubts lately, though whether they are true or not changes nothing, for now. I am not so sure if I actually traveled back in time, or just had a vision of the future. At first, I thought I had traveled back, but there are certain things that make me think that instead of me traveling back in time, I just had visions of the future. As for what those things are, and why I think that, I believe I don't need to share them as our contract doesn't cover it. I've already revealed the matters that pertain to Larry and why I was searching for him. Everyone looked towards Noman, who simply nodded to confirm he was telling the truth. They were all reeling from what they heard, but neither of them was more devastated than Anakin. Because of how apocalyptic the future Raphael witnessed was, he had no opportunity to learn any lottery numbers or know the leading stocks. Valuable investment opportunities were lost. The shame. Oh, the shame. What he did not know was that he should have been rejoicing that the future was different from what Raphael knew, for Anakin had been one of the many casualties in the war that had covered the globe. That was why he never had a chance to reveal his stunning skills and capabilities in that future. "There's no need to share more," Larry said slowly. "At least according to the old contract. But we can make a new deal. If you can answer some of my questions about the future, I'd be willing to help you out in whatever you need." Raphael took a moment to think, but then shook his head. "There's no need for another contract. I'll tell you what you want to know, since you'll already remove the important bits of my secret from your memory." Actually, Raphael was taking a risk. He was betting that while Larry would forget other things, he would not forget his sense of goodwill developed by him answering honestly, because there was no reason to deposit that. "In the future you saw, did I have a family?" he asked, barely keeping his voice from wavering. Raphael shook his head. "I didn't know you personally, so I don't know the details of your life. I did, however, know that you didn't seem to have any family or friends." He paused, to let him absorb that information, and then continued. "Since 3 of us are all from Earth, I'll share a bit more with all of you. After all, it has to do with our futures, and I'm hoping we can work together on this. After all, even if you remove your memories, the sense of belief or trust should still stay, so I'm hoping you'll help me." Anakin and Larry both nodded, though Larry was visibly upset right now. Anakin, though not taking things too seriously, did, after all, live on Earth, so he wanted to know what was going to happen. Earth has a huge secret that no one knows, though many suspect. If you've heard of the original 5 nascent cultivators who used to rule Earth, you might be familiar with the fact that one of them went from being immortal to a nascent cultivator overnight. Larry himself found an incredible treasure, and I encountered something that allowed me to view the future. Anakin had dreams telling him about cultivation techniques. There are many, many more examples of people becoming way too lucky on Earth. You may think that it's all just coincidence, but if a coincidence repeats too often, it starts to seem suspicious. And the truth is, it really isn't a coincidence. Earth is not as it seems. The planet is actually a prison for an evil goddess named Batet, and many others. This is because Earth, and its surrounding region in space, are in what is known as a dead zone in the universe. I don't know much about these, just that they are severely suffocated of spiritual energy. But I do know that in the year 2025 something happens, and the dead zone changes, and Earth, along with the solar system, becomes flooded with spiritual energy much more concentrated than the normal universe. The flood of spiritual energy causes the goddess to break free of her restraints, and that's when. There was pin-drop silence as everyone listened to Raphael very seriously, even Noman. This was because he had heard of Batet before. Origin realm, planet Hosaf. The entire world was filled with a deathly silence as every living being, from single-celled organisms to sentient life forms, were under the coercion of a black-furred cat. "I have returned, you wretched traitors," her voice echoed over the planet. "Know this, and live in fear. The moment I break through my shackles, your end shall be nigh." There was nothing more that Batet wanted than to decimate this entire planet, but as someone who had touched upon the Tao, she was under heavy restrictions. Even she did not dare flaunt Hanali's rules, but hopefully soon, that would no longer be a concern. Chapter 350 Blanket of Darkness. Lex was extremely pleased with how satisfied his guests were with the hot tub room. They only woke up around 2 p.m. the next day, and when they came down to the hall, they were extremely refreshed. And hungry. They were so energetic that they were having no trouble handling their kids, and for once, they sat at a few tables like a civilized family, chatting and laughing together. Betty was hard at work in the kitchen, making sure they didn't run short of food, and his delinquent helpers were also hard at work, doing whatever they could. Strangely enough, though, the triplets had not shown up to work as of yet. Considering their disciplined behavior so far, Lex was a little concerned at their absence and sent Big Ben over to investigate. He had been gone a while now, and should be back any time now. In the meantime, Lex leaned back in his chair and listened to the new musician he had temporarily hired. His performance and popularity would determine if Lex kept him, but so far he and his accordion had delivered a splendid performance. A short while later, Big Ben returned with the three girls, but the expressions on their faces warned of grave news. Lex quickly got up and checked if the girls were all right before asking what happened. "Their neighbors were killed," said Big Ben gravely. "Almost all of them. It was the serial killer. The bodies were discovered last night by accident. The constables suspected their family, since they were unharmed amidst all that, and arrested them. But the entire family works, so they all had alibis and had to be let go." The hair on Lex's back stood up as he imagined discovering all your neighbors had been killed in their own homes. That was genuinely horrific, especially when one considered that it could easily have been them instead of their neighbors who had been murdered. "Where's your family? Do they have a place to stay? If not, bring them to the tavern and we'll figure something out. They're at the town shelter, along with Dino and his wife. They lived nearby as well, and they're too scared to go back." Lex hesitated, but then nodded. He didn't know what the town shelter was like, but at least it would be more secure since it was being overseen by the town. He told the girls again that they could bring their family to the tavern if needed and offered them a holiday. But the girls refused and said that they were fine and wanted to work. They tried their best to seem normal, but anyone could see the absence of the usual mirth they carried with them. Lex, too, was perturbed by the situation. He had been taking the serial killer lightly, as he completely expected that he or she would be caught soon. But the situation was becoming drastically worse, and the constables seemed incapable of handling the situation. The security here was worse than he expected. He sent someone to find and call Roland over. He really wanted to see what the news had to say about the discovered murders. Everything was happening contrary to common sense. He could still accept that this region, which was supposed to be one of the richest in the realm, showed no opulence. He could accredit it to the excellent management of the Noel family. But if their management and control over this region was excellent, why were so many murders going unimpeded? This was especially the case when the Noel brothers themselves passed through the town as well. Unless it was the Noel family itself behind the murders, for whatever reason. Whatever the case, Lex started to get a bad feeling. He needed to prepare in case things got worse. Babylon town, 800 meters below the ground. The murderer licked the blood off the blade, his body trembling as he savored his kills. He was currently in the underground chambers that housed the formation encompassing Babylon. Even if someone knew the supposed weaknesses of the formation, it was not so straightforward to reach it. Weakness was only a relative term, as no expenses were spared. After all, the lives of all the townspeople depended on this formation. Providing light to the town was only one of the many functions of the formation, amongst a low-level spiritual gathering function, a barrier function to lock down the town, and others. With the importance of the formation, it can easily be guessed how difficult it would be to reach it, yet the killer strolled carelessly through the hall. "System, how many points do I need to get something that can override this formation?" asked a surprisingly charming and energetic voice. "No points required. Host has already received a reward for a previous quest that can both upgrade and override the formation." "How lucky," the killer replied, wearing a handsome grin. "How very lucky." His system did not comment on his remark, so the only remaining sound was that of steady footsteps walking through the chambers, leaving a trail of bloody footprints behind. "Try this, it's called hot chocolate. It's perfect for cold weather," said Lex as he slid a mug across the counter to Roland. The young businessman went nowhere without his entourage, and this time it was larger than last, consisting of 15 other kids. It couldn't be helped, as even though the city was well lit even in the dark, they were, after all, children. They would use 100 excuses to hide it, but they were afraid of the horrors of the dark. Even though they had experienced a period of darkness well over 20 times in their short lives without incident, the promise of monsters hiding in the dark never failed to strike fear. "I can't. I'm on a budget. Dark times are always bad for business." Lex shrugged and took a sip from the mug himself. He was tempted to offer it for free, but he had noticed during his daily meditations that he was becoming more and more comfortable giving out things for free. It was a habit he needed to curb, lest it seep into other areas of his life. "When do you expect to get the latest news?" Lex asked, wiping the whipped cream from his upper lip. "Like I said, business is bad during dark times. They only compile news crystals once a week rather than daily, because less happens during dark times. You'll have to wait for 3 more days." "Well, just make sure to have it delivered to the tavern when it's ready. Treat me like a fixed client, I'll even get a few for some of my tenants, so bring a few." "No problem. Consider it done. But, I'm not here today to talk about that. I have a business proposal for you. You ever get tired of running errands through the town? Of sending someone out every time you need to grab a delivery, send a message, or find someone? Of wasting valuable time on petty chores? Well, with our errand boy service, with a subscription of only 2 silver coins a week." Lex was listening to Roland's pitch with amusement when goosebumps covered his body, and his instincts acted up. But the feeling of danger vanished just as quickly as it came. Lex was momentarily confused, not understanding what his instincts were trying to warn him of when he noticed the hall looked just a bit dimmer. That was strange, none of the lights in the hall had gone out. What could? He looked out the window and looked at Baker Street. It was dark. Some light was still falling onto the street from the windows of the various buildings, but the various street lights that kept the town as bright as Times Square had gone out. Ignoring Roland, who had not noticed and was still delivering a pitch, Lex quickly rushed to the window and took a look outside. All the lights on the street that had been put up by the town had shut down, leaving only those being used by people privately. Even that would not last for long, as the people would eventually run out of spirit stones to power the lights endlessly. Roland and some of the folks in the hall noticed Lex's odd behavior and looked outside as well, trying to discover what happened. The first thought everyone had was another murder, so they didn't immediately notice the darkness as they were looking for bodies. Soon, though, people started to notice the oddity. But by then, Lex was already gone. Swiftly, he climbed the stairs and reached the rooftop terrace to get a good look at the town. Sadly, the situation was just as he expected. A blanket of darkness had covered Babylon, with faint lights twinkling in the dark like fireflies in the distance. Lex let out a sigh as his mind started racing. He had a decision to make. Chapter 351 Screams. Standing on the rooftop, there were numerous thoughts running through his head. He was thinking of his tenants, of the people of the town, of the Noel family, of the killer, of the darkness, and, most importantly, about himself. There was a very subtle feeling in his gut, something much milder than any warning he had ever received from his instincts. He could not exactly identify what it was, and it was so mild in fact, that it was only now that he realized that it had been building up for a while now. He closed his eyes and tried to focus. He could feel the cold wind running across his body, hear it whispering in his ear like a close friend. He could feel weight. It was the weight of his body, but also of responsibility. He had with him the ability to shelter the entire town should he wish, but in doing so he would paint a massive target on his back. Maybe, during the darkness, no one would target him, or maybe he would be targeted by a few greedy people. He wasn't concerned about that. His concern was the immortals that might become curious if the mysteries surrounding the tavern seemed just a little too far-fetched. With his impressive formation, and the amount of MP he had, he was sure he could survive an immortal coming to the tavern. But if more than one came, or they used some means beyond his understanding, he would be vulnerable. It was best not to enter their sights. But that more or less meant condemning the town to care for itself. It was a very difficult decision, but fortunately not one he had to make immediately. He didn't know what caused the issue with the formation, and maybe it could be fixed. Moreover, there were too many variables in this uncertain time for him to account for. After some consideration, he decided to face things as they came. For now, he would not do anything too drastic. But one thing was certain, he had no intentions of taking a single step outside the tavern. The feeling in his gut, it was like he had accidentally wandered into the territory of a predator. The signs were around him, but he did not know if he was the target. Moreover, it was not just danger he sensed. It was something more. Something beyond his understanding that was attracting him. It went beyond the scope of treasure or something valuable. It felt like a piece of his soul that he didn't know he was missing. It was too confusing to actually understand. Instead, he settled for preparing for the worst. Having made up his mind, he quickly returned to the main hall, where guests had gathered at the windows and began to panic. "Ladies and gents," his loud but calm voice blanketed the hall, grabbing everyone's attention. "Before discussing anything else, I would like to assure you that so long as you are within the premises of this tavern, you are completely safe." He stopped talking for a moment as he continued to descend the stairs, his movements marked with a blinding lack of haste or concern. It was as if he was taking a casual stroll in his own home, which, in a way, he was. "I am not sure why the lights went out, but I'm sure that the issue will be fixed shortly. Even if it isn't, once again, I have to remind you that the tavern is safe and we have enough food reserves to feed everyone for a long, long time. At this time, it is very important that everyone maintain the utmost calm. Have some food, have a few drinks, relax, listen to some music, go take a nap, whatever you want. But do not create a panic." At this time, the relaxed demeanor Lex had been nurturing as a tavern owner disappeared and his characteristics as the innkeeper shone through. He was calm and commanding, reassuring everyone while at the same time taking control of the situation. So long as they were inside his tavern, during this emergency period, they would have to listen to his orders. While the numerous guests calmed down a bit and began discussing amongst themselves what they thought might have happened, a few approached him with questions. Based on his performance, many assumed that he might have some information on what happened, but unfortunately, he did not. For now, at least. The rumor room might provide him with a few ideas of what happened, but that would have to wait. He went up to Roland, who, despite his young age, seemed to have maintained his composure. Or, at least that's what he displayed up front. Lex could tell at a glance that the kid was just pretending, so his friends would feel reassured. "You guys go sit in the private room from last time," Lex told him. "I'll send some food over, and it's on the house, so don't worry. I strongly recommend you do not travel anywhere in the dark. From what I understand, it only takes a few minutes for some of the weaker monsters to form during the darkness." Roland hesitated, but eventually nodded. It was not obvious to the unobservant, but Roland was actually very proud. He detested taking handouts, and only ever relied on himself for anything he wanted. Even now, he had to struggle to accept Lex's help, and were it not for his friends behind him, he would have struggled even more. Sending the kids away, he summoned all his employees and temp workers to the kitchen. "I know everyone might be worried about their families and friends out there," Lex said, looking at the triplets. "And I won't stop anyone who wants to leave, but I don't recommend leaving the tavern. The mayor is probably working on a solution as we speak, and things might get better soon. But in case they don't, staying here is the best solution." Hina and the rest of the spoilt kids had gone completely pale and they were panicking too hard to think clearly. They wanted nothing more than to return to the safety of their homes, but at the same time, they were too afraid to traverse the darkness. Lex didn't particularly care for them. It might sound harsh, but while Lex had a newly emerging sense of protectiveness, it only extended to his employees and guests. He would of course not throw them out to fend for themselves, but they would get no pity or leniency from him. After the triplets, despite their extreme distraught states, decided on staying at the tavern, Lex continued. "We don't know how long this will last, but I believe in preparing for the worst. Follow me." He led them to a remote corner of the kitchen and moved a table, revealing a hatch in the floor. He decided to use the system and added a couple of secret underground rooms, pretending as if he had them hidden all along. One set of secret rooms, entered through the kitchen, would be for his employees to live at. He created another one with a secret entrance right in the main hall, hidden behind the bar. It was not massive, but it could accommodate a few more people in case the situation developed to them requiring refugees. He opened the hatch and climbed down the dimly lit vertical stairs, revealing a corridor with 5 small rooms. He assigned one to Big Ben and Betty, and the triplets shared another. Ron and Rick, who had previously been living in the backyard, would also take a room each, to keep up appearances. Once everyone got familiar with the rooms, they returned to the ground floor and everyone continued with their jobs. Betty began cooking, because it would be lunchtime soon and because eating would temporarily distract people. Lex sent Big Ben to his neighbor's bakery to summon Dino and his wife over. Since the street seemed to be empty, of both people and monsters, it took him but a couple of minutes. The baker and his wife accepted the offer and quickly came over. As neighbors, they naturally heard about the speciality of the tavern, and were too afraid to remain in their own bakery. Strangely though, none of the other shop owners on the street came over. Lex didn't bother extending the invite either, for he didn't want Big Ben going too far. After the first half an hour, which was spent making minor preparations and passing out instructions, Lex ran out of things to do. All there really was to do was wait now. Wait and hope to either see the lights or the town guard patrolling the streets. Unfortunately, the first person Lex saw on his street was not a guard, but a corpse that had been thrown out of a building. The loud sound of a body crashing through a wall attracted everyone's attention, just in time to watch a long, bony thing emerge from a house. It looked more like an abstract piece of art than a creature. That did not, however, stop it from emitting a howl that shattered countless windows on Baker Street. The howl was followed by screams. Chapter 352 Lunch is served. It had been nearly a year since the Midnight Inn first appeared, and regardless of its apparent popularity, on a universal scale, it was not even equivalent to a blip. First of all, a majority of all living beings in existence were simply not destined to ever make use of the inn because it would take months of savings to accumulate even 1 MP. Second of all, despite its excellent services, they simply had no need for it. Even if one wanted a vacation, traveling somewhere local made more sense than some remote area in the universe. Among certain crowds, however, its popularity was spreading. This crowd mostly contained Foundation Realm and Golden Core Realm cultivators. The price was steep but acceptable, and the services were truly unmatched by anything on their planets. Moreover, the entertainment was excellent. But while this crowd made up the majority of the guests the inn received, there was another strata of universal beings taking note of the inn. This consisted of those who kept tabs on rumors of any and all Dowlords, and the latest rumor was of an unknown Dowlord behind the scenes at the inn. Credibility was added to this rumor when the devil known as Loretta let it slip that she strongly suspected it was true. For the people who did not know the weight of her words, they meant nothing. For those that did, it changed everything. In the Milky Way galaxy, on a spaceship traveling at full speed across the stars, a man was hung in the air by chains that pierced into his collarbone. His legs had been chopped off clean, and his body was covered in brutal scars, but his hands and his face were not harmed in the slightest. This man was known as Mr. Jekyll, and was the instigator behind the rascal attack on the Midnight Inn. His life had been just peachy up until recently, when the organization backing him learned of the rumor about the Midnight Inn. Upon hiring independent investigators, unrelated to the organization, they learned that not only was the inn unharmed by their small skirmish, they had a very mysterious backer. Although this organization could afford to mess with the William family, messing with a Dowlord was out of the question. But, considering the fact that there was no retaliation, they assumed that the Dowlord could not be bothered with them. They did, however, need to punish Mr. Jekyll so that he would rein in his arrogance and stop offending any more people unnecessarily. They had humored him this much because of his unique ability, but it wasn't worth being destroyed over. "That's enough rest," echoed a voice from the dark. "Let's continue your punishment." If the rumor about a Dowlord had spread so far that even simple organizations could discover it, then the larger ones would also soon be in the know. The matter of fact was that as soon as the Jotun royal family gained a certain level of surety in the matter, they spread the news in the relevant circles. It may seem like those larger organizations hadn't taken any action, but it was only because they operated on a universal scale. Let alone less than a year, even 10,000 years, was a short time frame for them. But, the preliminary process had already begun, and today, they officially began acknowledging the inn's existence. With a flash of light, several humanoid beings appeared at the inn at the same time. If one were to judge them based on the myths and lores from Earth, they looked like a devil, an angel, an elf, a dwarf, some unknown being of which there were no myths, and a human. They looked at one another silently while contemplating something. Finally, the angel spoke. 6 beings from 6 different galaxies, but we arrived at the exact same time. This is unlike any teleportation I am familiar with. You do not need to be familiar, spoke the devil in a matter-of-fact way. You only need to do your job. Remember, angel, we are only here as messengers. Do not provoke trouble, for us devils have been ordered not to provoke the Midnight Inn. I see a dragon, said the elf, ignoring the existing conversation. It has the mark of the condottiere. If the inn needs to hire security, maybe they do not have strong manpower, said the dwarf. Stop probing lest you offend someone, said the being from the unknown race. Too late, replied the elf. They looked up into the sky and saw a baby whale, swimming through the skies. Walking slowly beneath it was a large turtle, with a single horn protruding from its head. At first, the group did not pay much attention because it was weak. Then they recognized its race, and froze. Crap, said the human, ready to escape. This was much scarier than a dragon. But the turtle paid them no attention at all, and just kept moving. After all, it was completely normal for new guests to scan the inn with their spirit sense. He was already used to it. Only after it left did the 6 humanoid beings, all on the verge of becoming immortals, finally breathe. Even if they became actual immortals, they would not be insane enough to offend a being with the word sovereign right in the name of its race. The creature's howl was the signal that ushered in chaos. From stunning silence to the sounds of shattering glass everywhere, followed by bitter screams. The situation should not have been as bad as it was, since these creatures were relatively weak and everyone was a cultivator. To be specific, Lex couldn't see how good or bad the situation was, since most of the fights were happening inside the various buildings. For a moment, Lex thought it was because of the sudden fear of the dark, but then a thought struck him like thunder. This was the crystal realm, not Earth. This may have been Lex's first time encountering darkness like this here, but it should not have been the case for the citizens. They should have been mentally prepared to encounter an accident at any time. Yet nothing he saw indicated that even a single person was attempting to fight back. Something was very wrong, and it wasn't just the abrupt shutdown of the light formation. Something was elevating everyone's fear and preventing them from thinking clearly. At first when Lex saw everyone feel afraid he thought it was the natural reaction, but now it seemed that it wasn't. Moreover, they weren't the only ones affected. Even Lex's first reaction to the darkness was one of fear. He lost his composure easily and even began fearing being attacked by immortals. While his thought process was logical, Lex was not someone so easily frightened anymore. He had overcome too many unforeseen obstacles to be afraid of something that might happen. Lex thought of several ways he could test his theory, but that would have to wait for later. Mentally using the system, he outfitted the rooftop with an extremely strong light and turned it on, pointing it towards the sky. Not only did it brighten up the surrounding area, it stood as a beacon in the dark, signaling everyone to come here. As for the consequences if he attracted too much attention, he would deal with it when the matter arose. Worst comes to worst, he could claim his dad was an immortal. It wouldn't be the first time someone in the crystal realm would believe that anyway. But while he could attract attention with light, that was about all he could do. Even though the monsters formed now were weak and he could face them, something strange was going on and he was not enough of a saint to risk his life for strangers. The weird bony monster that let out the howl looked directly towards Lex after it finished with its first meal. The guests in the hall were immediately frightened and fell backwards, but Lex remained standing. As if provoked, the monster lurched towards Lex. But, before it could even get close to the window in front of which Lex was standing, it froze. It had entered the boundary of the tavern when it crossed the small garden in front, and was thus within the space formation. Lex put it in a room of the exact shape of its body, and then squeezed. The monster blew up, unable to even touch the tavern building. Lex looked on as if he had seen something unremarkable. In fact, he was no longer paying attention to the street. He was discussing contingency measures with Mary, and using the system scan constantly to monitor the tavern. After all, they would not be polite enough to only attack from the front. He had to keep an eye out on all sides. Upon seeing the monster explode, the guests were slightly reassured. Bang! The kitchen door slammed open, startling everyone, but instead of monsters, it revealed the triplets walking out with trays of food. "Lunch is served," said Naki with a smile. Chapter 353 Epistle. The 6 humanoid beings toured the inn separately, for though they had the same objective and represented the same organization, the differences ingrained in them due to their races kept them from truly working together. The devil had the easiest time, for he simply walked to the stall the devils had set up at the inn in their attempts to make deals with various beings from various worlds. The devils were one of the richest races in the origin realm, and while their uncanny control over demons was a major source of wealth, their never-ending enterprising mentality also played a huge role. The others either explored on their own or took their personal holograms as guides to fully understand everything about the inn. Most aspects of the inn were very normal to them, since their experience was extremely vast. Yet a few things still stood out to them here and there. The mystery trial was one unique building they could not fully understand, though they could not try it themselves, for it was one of the most popular attractions and always had a line. Another was the way the Lady Cosmos competition was being broadcast so randomly throughout the origin realm. A rather important one was how the inn was cut off from the rest of the origin realm. They could not communicate with anyone outside the inn while inside it, something they had special equipment for. All in all, the inn seemed very ordinary on the surface most of the time, but once in a while it would let slip its specialness. After their judgment, they regrouped, and made a joint request to meet with the innkeeper. As Lex was not available, they ended up meeting Mary, as had been the case with everyone who wanted to meet the innkeeper since Lex left. "How may I be of assistance?" Mary asked politely as she observed the 6 guests. Though she could not scan them, a glance was all that was required to determine that they were of unusual origins. Unexpectedly, of the 6 races, it was the human that stepped forward and spoke. "Would it be possible to meet the innkeeper? We represent a special organization we believe the innkeeper would be most interested in. The innkeeper has left the inn on some important business. I cannot say when he will be back, as I do not know, but you can deliver your message to me and I can directly transmit it to him." The 6 were not surprised at being unable to meet the innkeeper, for how could it be possible to meet a Dowlord at a simple request? In fact, it was not even their objective to meet the innkeeper. Their only job was to initiate contact between their organization and the innkeeper, and what followed afterwards was none of their concern. "In that case, I would like to officially present to you, for the innkeeper, an invitation to the Henali assembly." The human withdrew from his robe an epistle with the word Henali embossed in purple on the envelope. "The esteemed innkeeper can attend at his discretion, and will officially be welcomed as a member of the assembly at the time of his attendance." Of course, it goes without saying that the innkeeper can maintain his anonymity during the entire process, and no one will try to pry into his personal matters. At the same time, I bring on behalf of the assembly a small welcome gift to the origin realm for the innkeeper, as well as a copy of the Henali Convention should he wish to peruse. The elf stepped forward and revealed a small, wooden treasure chest. For the sake of his guests, Lex put a small illusion formation over the windows so that they would be unable to see the monsters outside, or hear their gruesome screams. The truth was Lex expected an influx of refugees after his beacon lit up the dark sky, but not a single person arrived. Hours later, the sounds of fighting and screaming on Baker Street disappeared and only a deluge of monsters remained, all charging towards the tavern building. The ease with which Lex killed them told him that they should barely be equivalent to the Foundation realm in strength, Yet somehow none of the residents were able to overcome them. More than the monsters, it was the mystery of what was affecting everyone that scared Lex. But now that he knew that something was artificially enhancing his fear and trying to disparage his mental faculties, he did his best to not let it affect him. His thinking cap helped greatly in this regard. In the town, if Lex was able to realize this, so were many others. The town guard, consisting of soldiers who would regularly see battle, had honed instincts and excellent battle awareness, so that even if they were afraid, they could hold their own wherever they were. Naturally, the 5 nobles, Mario Ricci, and the mayor all were just too strong to fall to enemies of this level, and were able to not only protect themselves but also their nearby subordinates. This way, a few pockets of survivors and resistance were formed within the city, formed of either battle-hardened soldiers and mercenaries or nascent-level cultivators. All of them saw the giant beacon of light, and while they did not know what it meant, started guiding their survivors that way. But they weren't the only ones who saw the beacon. So did the killer. But instead of being enraged by the clear indicator of survivors, he grinned with glee. As silent and deadly as an assassin, the killer moved through the darkness, one by one picking off any love survivors heading towards the light. This was too much fun. Just too much fun. His sight was not at all hindered by the darkness, for as the wielder of the murder system, he was uniquely equipped for the task. In contrast to the deathly desperation engulfing the city, the tavern hall was filled with light and soothing accordion music. The kids, those that came with the guests as well as Roland's friends, were all sitting in a private room playing a bunch of board games Lex magically produced. The adults all sat in the hall, which crowded the room considerably, but they were just too afraid to go into their rooms and be alone. The triplets were serving a soothing green tea, which acted as a mild sedative to calm their minds and keep them from overreacting to anything. Big Ben had to retreat, for all the energy he accumulated in his body from the various drinks he had at the tavern finally caused him to have a breakthrough. Betty was cooking in the kitchen, along with Dino, who was baking pies. Lex had done his best to keep everyone busy so that their minds would remain occupied and would spend less time thinking about the disaster occurring outside. Rick and Roan were the only ones who didn't need to be distracted, for they had unwavering faith in the tavern owner. Only Lex himself stood still, facing Baker Street while standing on the rooftop. He was looking out for any signs of survivors, but he only saw monsters. Speaking of which, it was a good thing that he had set an illusion formation, or the guests would never be able to calm down. After all, in the short period since the monsters appeared, Lex had killed over 3,000 monsters that attacked the tavern, with even more visible from where he stood. Things were glum. But, in that moment of dread, Lex heard a familiar sound, the sound of a system notification. New quest, host a Henali assembly at the Midnight Inn. Quest reward, subject to success of assembly. Remarks, maybe if you had friends, you could have hosted them. Instead, you can settle for hosting the oldest geezers in the realm. New quest, have the Midnight Inn officially recognized by the Henali assembly. Quest reward, guest registry. Remarks, you're getting fat. Lex was surprised, for he was expecting to get a quest related to the events happening in Babylon, but this was completely unrelated. In fact, he had to scan the inn to understand what had triggered the quest. But the 6 representatives who came to deliver the epistle and gifts did not stay long to elaborate and bid their farewell. He asked Mary if she knew anything about them, but the system provided her with no knowledge regarding anything they said. Lex was more or less completely in the dark about what the assembly even was. When he asked her to open the epistle, she was unable. In fact, she was unable to open any of the items left behind. Lex sighed and told her to put them away. These were destined to be just 2 more quests that would sit in his system collecting dust for a long time. An explosion nearby attracted his attention, and Lex finally saw the first survivors heading towards the tavern. It was just 2 people. Chapter 354, Bazooka. Though it was dark, with Lex's improved eyesight, it was easy for him to see their actions clearly. They were trained warriors, of that there was no doubt, and they had excellent teamwork as well. They were much stronger than the monsters assaulting them, but there was strength in numbers as well. Moreover, the monsters born of darkness had no set pattern, and so it was difficult to come up with a fixed strategy to face them. Some attacked from afar, and some slithered right at them. Lex watched silently as they slowly made their way towards the tavern. A few times, he noticed that some monsters were able to sneak up on them and managed to land a few hits. They were mostly unharmed, but that was solely due to their armor, which seemed to have some kind of enchantments. He mentally added a few spotlights to the top of the tavern and lit up the entire street. He didn't want to put the light directly on the two warriors as that might attract unnecessary attention. Now, instead, with the entire street lit up, it was easier for them to view the monsters. Calmly, he walked down to the main hall and awaited the two warriors' arrival. He was looking forward to any new information they could provide. A few minutes later, the warriors arrived at the front of the tavern, and noticed that as soon as any monster approached the building they would automatically explode. They were hesitant, and even afraid, to approach the tavern out of concern that the same may happen to them, but they had no choice. Originally, things should not have been so bad, but the town's guard had been overrun when they let fear interfere with their duty, and less than a third of them remained. They needed to understand more about this building throwing light into the air. Such an action not only assured them that this building had a large supply of spirit stones or some other form of energy to carelessly waste, but whatever defensive formation they had in place was still functioning. The truth was that the town had multiple contingency safe zones and secondary defensive formations in place in the event that the main formation shut down or broke. But when the anomaly with the main formation occurred, it suppressed all other formations within the city. This seemed to be the only one still working. And how could it not? 300 million MP for a formation that only covered a small region and only had the function of manipulating space made it far beyond anything local formations could compete against. Finally they took a risk and stepped in, and were greatly relieved when nothing happened. Still, they did not let down their guard as they stepped in, but not even in their wildest dreams would they have been prepared for what awaited them. While outside the temperature was well below freezing, a warm cozy breeze blew from the tavern door, accompanied by music and the sound of laughter. A waitress was carrying a tray full of steaming soup across the hall. Some of the sailors were playing a dice game while others were playing cards. A bartender was casually wiping a glass clean while standing ready at his station, awaiting a guest to come with an order. "Welcome guests," said Lex, when he noticed the men stood frozen at the entrance. "Come in, don't let all the warm air out." Lex's voice woke the men from their reverie, but also alerted all the guests of the new arrivals. They paused whatever they were doing and turned towards the door. The music stopped, and the room seemed to reach a standstill. The two men walked in, their gazes fixed on Lex, analyzing the man. Lex was also checking up on them and only retained the most important point: they were in the Golden Core realm. "Do you happen to know what is happening outside?" Lex asked, his voice as calm and soothing as always. But the two men did not perceive it as so. To them, it sounded like he was completely ignorant of what was going on, and was relying on some kind of backing to keep him safe. They scanned the tavern with their spirit sense to see if they could detect anyone else that was actually a threat. "We're with the city guard," said one of the men gruffly. "Under orders of the mayor, we're here to investigate the source of light. Give us some food and water, and stop wasting all your spirit stones on useless lights, and stop wasting all this food needlessly. Everyone here will take up arms and obey my orders. As of now, this building is being commandeered as a military checkpoint and you're all conscripted. Promptly prepare everything, and in the meantime." The man's eyes wandered to Nami, who had been serving soup, and just as he was about to say what was on his mind, the man's body shot out of the tavern like a rocket from a bazooka. His body smashed through dozens of monsters like the strongest artillery fire, and even through the front wall of the building on the opposite street. Lex had no idea if the man was alive or dead, and he frankly didn't care. Lex was more than happy waiting for him to finish before correcting him that the tavern would do no such thing, but the moment he turned his eyes onto Nami, Lex's patience evaporated. In all fairness, it was entirely possible that he was not about to make an uncouth demand towards Lex's staff, but just the look in his eyes was enough to turn Lex off. Were this the inn, Lex would have been bound by the system's rules and been unable to do anything until the man actually broke some rules. At the tavern, though, things were a lot more flexible and Lex could do as he pleased. In this case, what pleased Lex was to manipulate the space around the man and hurl him out of the building like yesterday's trash. "Please excuse that disturbance," Lex said, with a polite smile towards his guests, before turning back to the other man who had frozen still of his own accord. He still could not understand what had happened, and so did not dare to do anything rash. "As I asked your companion earlier, do you happen to know what's going on with the town?" The man did not think too much and obediently began answering. "Something has gone wrong with the town's array. Instead of keeping the town lit and secure, it's actively suppressing all light formations within, and instead of keeping monsters out, has trapped everyone within the town itself. We suspect sabotage, but haven't been able to investigate yet. The mayor is trying to rally all the town guards before he begins scouring the town looking for survivors, but because of the suppressed formations, there's no good place to gather everyone. That's when the light from your building appeared, and he tasked us with investigating it. Whether we respond or not, he will be coming here with the gathered soldiers soon enough." To the warrior's disappointment, Lex did not seem bothered by the news of the mayor's arrival, as if he wasn't threatened in any way whatsoever. "That's great news," said Lex. "I'm glad to see that the mayor is prioritizing the safety of his citizens. The formation's malfunction, though, is troubling news. I have no proof, but my gut tells me this may have something to do with the serial killer on the loose. Do you by chance happen to know the travel paths of any nearby soulbirds? How long can we expect this darkness to last?" The man grit his teeth and answered truthfully. "It's really hard to predict. Unless the Noel family learns of our plight and makes a move personally, the darkness should last anywhere between 1 to 3 months. Unfortunately, all communication with the outside has also been suspended." Lex nodded as he started making plans. It was best to prepare for the worst-case scenario. The serial killer was frowning hard as he killed another monster. The citizens in the town were dying way too quickly, and most of them to the monsters. This was not satisfying to him. He needed to make a few changes to make the game more fun. Yes, it needed to be even more fun. He manipulated the formation and created 6 safe zones in the town, where other protective formations weren't suppressed. He needed the people to live. They were supposed to fear him and die by his hands. The monsters and the darkness were only accompanying characters to his performance. He had to make sure everything was just right. System, list down all high-value targets in the area. I have to make sure they don't accidentally die. Several high-value targets are gathered at the Beacon of Life, and are safe from monster attacks. How lucky, he said with a chuckle. Chapter 355, Slimy Business. Now that you've completed your task, do you want to take some time to rest and eat, or will you be returning to finish your report? Asked Lex to the remaining warrior. The warrior trembled upon hearing the question. Fear of the unknown was the most common thing, and what kind of danger the tavern represented was more or less unknown to the man. He only knew that it was enough to crush him. But, at the same time, returning now, on his own, would present him with a great danger as well. Eventually, he grit his teeth and decided to return to the mayor while the option was still available. He did not dare to hope that the tavern owner would actually provide him with food and rest. As for going back and checking on his partner? Even if he had survived crashing through hordes of monsters and a building, possibly more than one building actually, he would most likely have been besieged by monsters by now. Even if, by some miracle, he had survived the monster attacks, he would be heavily wounded and his movement impaired. He would be a burden on the return journey, not an asset. Not wanting to waste another moment, the man quickly departed. His former partner launching out of the building had distracted the nearby monsters sufficiently for him to begin his escape with ease. Lex shrugged. It wasn't like he intended to punish this man as well, and so long as he paid, Lex would have let him rest. The carefully built environment of harmony in the tavern had been disrupted by the arrival of the 2 men. the news they shared wasn't what everyone had been hoping for. There was a problem with the town formation, and there was no communication with the outside. It would take months before the light returned. By then, the number of monsters would be much greater, and some of them may even be nearing the peak of the Foundation realm. When it came to monsters, their strength grew quickly in the beginning but would eventually slow down. Most never surpassed the Golden Core realm, if they reached it at all. But their threat did not lie in their strength, but their numbers. Lex wasn't too bothered by the news, because he more or less was expecting only bad news. So far, everything was still within the range where he could survive with just the tavern. I know some of you may be concerned about the duration, Lex addressed his guests. But don't worry, whether it's months or years, the one thing the tavern will not be short of is supplies and food. You also don't need to worry about the lights turning off in here. The greatest challenge for you is to find something to entertain yourself with. Lex's last sentence ended as a joke, and visibly relaxed everyone, but deep down, he meant it. Trapped in a building with nothing to do for a long time would slowly drive everyone insane. At the same time, this experience gave Lex a new perspective on the pro bono function of the inn. Across the many worlds, how many people would be in similar situations where they were completely trapped and needed aid? He understood that charity was not the purpose of the system, but suddenly he had a new appreciation for the feature. Maybe the system wasn't so bad. Maybe. 2 more days passed without anyone else arriving at the tavern. From the rooftop, Lex was able to see a few portions of the town where lights had appeared, which reassured him. He even shared the news with the guests. This meant that at least some people had found some kind of solution, and there were other survivors in the town. Moreover, if someone had found a way to turn on the light formations in those few areas, there was a chance that soon they would be able to fix the town's formation. Unbeknownst to Lex, their areas had lights, because the killer eased up the formation in those areas. He allowed the strong warriors and soldiers in the town to lead survivors into those zones, so that all his targets would accumulate in a few areas. Currently, he was picking apart one of the newly created safe zones, killing one survivor every hour. Of course, he was doing it personally instead of using monsters or the formations. How else was he to enjoy it as much as possible? While things had slowed down considerably at the tavern, back at the inn, things were climaxing. The final 10 of the Lady Cosmos had been selected. At any given time, there were 13 million guests at the inn to enjoy the show. While not all of these guests were staying at the inn, they would more or less still spend some MP. Still, even 1 MP at a time, Lex had managed to accumulate 7.8 billion MP more, bringing his total to 10 billion more or less. Actually, it was 10,057,007,000 MP. Lex took the opportunity to create a request in the guild room for pure energy crystals and put down a deposit of 57,007,000 MP. He would use this to test the waters and see if absorbing energy from within the inn would help his energy accumulation. If it was, despite Lex's earlier plans, he might speed up his return. After all, things were just too unpredictable at the tavern right now, and he did not want to spend months and possibly years trapped, unable to do anything. But while he had a lot of free time, Lex was not free, for he had to constantly manipulate the formation to kill monsters. This was not feasible, as he would never have the time to sleep or rest. As such, he ended up spending 0.3% of his accumulated energy to add the security room feature to the tavern as well. He temporarily made Rick in charge of security via the security room, and gave him control over the formation as well. This way, while Lex wasn't managing the security himself, Rick would do it. With that done, he spent a good deal of time cultivating, and when he got tired he would watch the Lady Cosmos show. Surprisingly, of the top 10, only 2 were actually humans. One was Haley, the farmer from X-142 that Harry had grown fond of, and the other was Alyssa, the YouTuber from Earth. The favorite to win at the moment was a fair, followed closely by a slime. As surprising as it was for Lex to learn that slimes could be female, he was even more surprised to learn that this particular slime would manipulate its shape to form a very seductive humanoid figure. Moreover, it could manipulate the color of its slime to give itself the appearance of a woman in beautiful clothing. Its latest figure was that of an elf that it had seen at the inn, which managed to steal a decent bit of the boats from Earth. There was also a fox beast from Nibiru which, after undergoing an evolution in its bloodline due to the growth of the planet itself, could shapeshift into a human appearance. The remaining 5 contestants were from a race Lex wasn't familiar with called echoes. They were not humanoid at all, but their cuteness level was astonishing. They were like cuddly teddy bears with eyes that could melt ice and a laugh that could fill one with glee. The next stage of the competition would be an intense one, for it was not on stage or in a stadium. Instead, in the floating city above the village, the remaining girls would have to live for 5 days unaided. Moreover, lucky viewers, and some wealthy ones who paid for the opportunity, would be living in the city alongside them. The final judgment would actually be influenced by votes of the viewers in the city, and the girls would have to convince them to gain their vote. This would be a live test of not only their charisma and social skills, but of their ingenuity and survival skills. This was because, other than a house to live in, the girls would not be provided with anything else. Of course, during this portion, the girls would be provided with security to ensure something untoward did not happen. Moreover, it had to be ensured that the girls would not buy votes using some kind of shady deals or offers, and that only their ability to convince fans would be at play. Lex was watching the slime have a jovial conversation with a group of ladies over coffee, regaling them with tales of its life, when Rick came to alert him of something. From the rooftop, he has seen an entire group of people approach the tavern, slowly and steadily fighting against the hordes. In the lead of that group was Mario Ricci, the goat father. Chapter 356 disappeared. Lex was not at all surprised that Mario was unhurt. After all, he was much too strong for monsters of this level to overwhelm him. But when he reached his rooftop and saw the size of his party, he was extremely surprised. It was much too small. Only around 10 people were following him. All of whom were excellent fighters on their own as well. Clearly, they would have survived even without Mario as long as the rest were together. But their small numbers and, most of all, slow and steady speed told Lex something was going on. That's when Lex noticed that Mario's son, Elio, was not with the group. He did not jump to conclusions, but he kept the thought in mind. Despite how near they were, the group did not get impatient at all, and continued on their pace. It took nearly an hour before they finally reached the tavern. Like the previous 2 warriors, the group was hit hard by how contrasting the environment within the tavern was. But unlike the first group, they did not become overly arrogant once they reached this establishment filled with civilians. Thugs like them had a deeper understanding of the way of the world. In the killing field that Babylon had now become, only disgustingly overwhelming strength would allow one to live in such comfort. Lex had prepared food for everyone already, and at the sight of the steaming bowls of soup being laid down for them, these rough-and-tumble men gave Lex a look filled with sheer appreciation and gratitude, and sat down to savor their first meal in days. Mario, however, did not go towards the food and instead sat himself down at the bar, his deep-set eyes gazing out into the distance. He ordered hard liquor with nothing but a gesture and downed the glass like a parched man chugging water. "Your party is smaller than I would have expected," said Lex as he approached the man. Men like Mario did not need consolation or words to ease them. Instead, treating them softly or carefully might actually offend them. In such a case, it was best to just be upfront with them about what you were curious about. "It was that damn killer," Mario said, his voice hoarse. He downed another glass and began to pour one more drink for himself. "He shepherded us like cattle towards the light, only to pick us off one by one. Even I couldn't catch him. He has clever ways to hide in the shadows, and of making people disappear, only for their corpses to reappear a short while later. Do you think he had something to do with the light formation failing? He shouldn't. While he is very tricky and clever, he is not strong enough. The formation is heavily guarded. It would take at least a nascent cultivator to break through all of its defenses, and if he were that strong, he wouldn't be picking off the weak like that. He would be aiming for me. Instead, what he's been doing is not targeting me, but targeting people right in front of me. There's a small, but significant difference. Lex did not need to ask to know what the difference was. One meant that the killer was strong enough to challenge Mario, while the other meant the killer knew he couldn't take on Mario himself, but was skilled or crazy enough to antagonize him. Lex asked him if he knew the situation in the rest of the city, which Mario did not. He had stuck close to his own turf until it became obvious that the killer would pick them off one by one unless they left. One thing that caught Lex's curiosity was that the killer somehow had a way to not be targeted by the monsters in the dark. While everyone else was fighting for their lives, the killer was sailing through the darkness like a ship in calm waters. Mario did not say much else, but the addition of new guests quickly caught everyone's attention. With not much else to do, they talked and exchanged stories, and quickly a new fear began to spread between those staying at the tavern that Mario and his gang had led the killer right to them. But nothing of the sort happened. The tavern was as safe as always. While Big Ben and Betty were just glad to be alive and safe, the triplets along with the bakers had many minor panic attacks. They all had family out in the dark, but they knew there was nothing they could do to search for them. The small spark of stimulation provided with the addition of new guests soon waned as the days returned to their previous monotony. Lex had somehow produced more mattresses and bedding, and opened up the hidden chamber underneath the bar so the tavern wouldn't get even more crowded. 7 more days passed like that and, just as everyone, the kids especially, were about to lose their minds, another group was spotted heading towards the tavern. This group was much larger than Mario's, but when they arrived, they were also in much worse shape. This group had been led by one of the nobles and the parents of one of the extra staff Lex had helping at the tavern. Unsurprisingly, their story was very similar to Mario's. They were surviving, barely, in one of the safe zones that had developed around the town, until one day when the killer appeared and started killing them off one by one. It was out of sheer desperation that they ventured out into the dark, but the giant beacon of light was not their first destination. It was like they had been forced by the killer to come this way, for when they head in any other direction, the murders would increase. Lex received this news with surprising calm. It made sense. He had been feeling something was slowly building from the moment the lights failed. 4 days later, another man appeared. He walked through the darkness alone, the monsters dying around him. He was another noble, and he had been unable to save a single person. It was mostly the monsters that killed everyone he had tried to protect, and the few survivors had been picked off by the killer. The next day, the remaining 3 nobles arrived as well, once again alone. By now the tavern building was jam-packed, even with the secret storage downstairs. The mood was grim. It seemed like they were the last survivors in the town, for no one knew what was happening with the mayor and town guards. Even with nearly 100 people packed into the tavern building, it felt like the loneliest place in the world. They lived on a small island of safety, surrounded by a hungry abyss. At least, that was until Dino and Betty started getting creative with their foods, and started asking everyone what their favorite was. With the endless supply of ingredients that Rick somehow always provided them with, the mealtimes at the tavern became the most anticipated times of the day. People would place bets, and play guessing games as to what would be the meals of the day. The music never stopped playing, and Lex provided an infinite variety of board game ideas for everyone to entertain themselves. It really did feel like there was a festival going on inside. This was because one day Lex had an epiphany. If everyone's mood was being disrupted artificially by some means, could he not do the same? He purchased a formation that blocked any outside interference in emotions, and another that slightly eased the mind. That was all that was needed, for the numerous children inside immediately became joyful, and entertained all the guests. They created their own plays, and put on their own performances. Deep down, no one forgot that they were in a desperate situation. But at the same time, they could do nothing about it, so they chose to indulge in whatever joys they could claim. Unbeknownst to them, for the last 3 days, the killer had been outside the tavern, hiding from the spotlight that lit up the street. He had been watching. His plan to lure all the high-value targets in one place was a success. What he did not expect, however, was that his system would fail to provide a safe way to infiltrate the tavern. So, for the last few days, he had been using his X-ray sight to carefully observe the tavern and its inhabitants. There were too many peculiar things going on in there that could not be explained, so the killer didn't really try. His entire focus was on finding a way to infiltrate. In the end, when he could not find a way on his own, he had to rely on one of the quest rewards he had been saving up to kill the mayor. System: prepare the death bubble. Target the highest value person in that building. Suddenly, Lex, who was busy cultivating in his room, disappeared. Chapter 356 disappeared. Lex was not at all surprised that Mario was unhurt. After all, he was much too strong for monsters of this level to overwhelm him. But when he reached his rooftop and saw the size of his party, he was extremely surprised. It was much too small. Only around 10 people were following him. All of whom were excellent fighters on their own as well. Clearly, they would have survived even without Mario as long as the rest were together. But their small numbers and, most of all, slow and steady speed told Lex something was going on. That's when Lex noticed that Mario's son, Elio, was not with the group. He did not jump to conclusions, but he kept the thought in mind. Despite how near they were, the group did not get impatient at all, and continued on their pace. It took nearly an hour before they finally reached the tavern. Like the previous two warriors, the group was hit hard by how contrasting the environment within the tavern was. But unlike the first group, they did not become overly arrogant once they reached this establishment filled with civilians. Thugs like them had a deeper understanding of the way of the world. In the killing field that Babylon had now become, only disgustingly overwhelming strength would allow one to live in such comfort. Lex had prepared food for everyone already, and at the sight of the steaming bowls of soup being laid down for them, these rough-and-tumble men gave Lex a look filled with sheer appreciation and gratitude, and sat down to savor their first meal in days. Mario, however, did not go towards the food and instead sat himself down at the bar, his deep-set eyes gazing out into the distance. He ordered hard liquor with nothing but a gesture and downed the glass like a parched man chugging water. "Your party is smaller than I would have expected," said Lex as he approached the man. Men like Mario did not need consolation or words to ease them. Instead, treating them softly or carefully might actually offend them. In such a case, it was best to just be upfront with them about what you were curious about. "It was that damn killer," Mario said, his voice hoarse. He downed another glass and began to pour one more drink for himself. "He shepherded us like cattle towards the light, only to pick us off one by one. Even I couldn't catch him. He has clever ways to hide in the shadows, and of making people disappear, only for their corpses to reappear a short while later. Do you think he had something to do with the light formation failing? He shouldn't. While he is very tricky and clever, he is not strong enough. The formation is heavily guarded. It would take at least a nascent cultivator to break through all of its defenses, and if he were that strong, he wouldn't be picking off the weak like that. He would be aiming for me. Instead, what he's been doing is not targeting me, but targeting people right in front of me. There's a small, but significant difference." Lex did not need to ask to know what the difference was. One meant that the killer was strong enough to challenge Mario, while the other meant the killer knew he couldn't take on Mario himself, but was skilled or crazy enough to antagonize him. Lex asked him if he knew the situation in the rest of the city, which Mario did not. He had stuck close to his own turf until it became obvious that the killer would pick them off one by one unless they left. One thing that caught Lex's curiosity was that the killer somehow had a way to not be targeted by the monsters in the dark. While everyone else was fighting for their lives, the killer was sailing through the darkness like a ship in calm waters. Mario did not say much else, but the addition of new guests quickly caught everyone's attention. With not much else to do, they talked and exchanged stories, and quickly a new fear began to spread between those staying at the tavern that Mario and his gang had led the killer right to them. But nothing of the sort happened. The tavern was as safe as always. While Big Ben and Betty were just glad to be alive and safe, the triplets along with the Bakers had many minor panic attacks. They all had family out in the dark, but they knew there was nothing they could do to search for them. The small spark of stimulation provided with the addition of new guests soon waned as the days returned to their previous monotony. Lex had somehow produced more mattresses and bedding, and opened up the hidden chamber underneath the bar so the tavern wouldn't get even more crowded. 7 more days passed like that and, just as everyone, the kids especially, were about to lose their minds, another group was spotted heading towards the tavern. This group was much larger than Mario's, but when they arrived, they were also in much worse shape. This group had been led by one of the nobles and the parents of one of the extra staff Lex had helping at the tavern. Unsurprisingly, their story was very similar to Mario's. They were surviving, barely, in one of the safe zones that had developed around the town, until one day when the killer appeared and started killing them off one by one. It was out of sheer desperation that they ventured out into the dark, but the giant beacon of light was not their first destination. It was like they had been forced by the killer to come this way, for when they head in any other direction, the murders would increase. Lex received this news with surprising calm. It made sense. He had been feeling something was slowly building from the moment the lights failed. 4 days later, another man appeared. He walked through the darkness alone, the monsters dying around him. He was another noble, and he had been unable to save a single person. It was mostly the monsters that killed everyone he had tried to protect, and the few survivors had been picked off by the killer. The next day, the remaining 3 nobles arrived as well, once again alone. By now the tavern building was jam-packed, even with the secret storage downstairs. The mood was grim. It seemed like they were the last survivors in the town, for no one knew what was happening with the mayor and town guards. Even with nearly 100 people packed into the tavern building, it felt like the loneliest place in the world. They lived on a small island of safety, surrounded by a hungry abyss. At least, that was until Dino and Betty started getting creative with their foods, and started asking everyone what their favorite was. With the endless supply of ingredients that Rick somehow always provided them with, the meal times at the tavern became the most anticipated times of the day. People would place bets, and play guessing games as to what would be the meals of the day. The music never stopped playing, and Lex provided an infinite variety of board game ideas for everyone to entertain themselves. It really did feel like there was a festival going on inside. This was because one day Lex had an epiphany. If everyone's mood was being disrupted artificially by some means, could he not do the same? He purchased a formation that blocked any outside interference in emotions, and another that slightly eased the mind. That was all that was needed, for the numerous children inside immediately became joyful, and entertained all the guests. They created their own plays, and put on their own performances. Deep down, no one forgot that they were in a desperate situation. But at the same time, they could do nothing about it, so they chose to indulge in whatever joys they could claim. Unbeknownst to them, for the last 3 days, the killer had been outside the tavern, hiding from the spotlight that lit up the street. He had been watching. His plan to lure all the high-value targets in one place was a success. What he did not expect, however, was that his system would fail to provide a safe way to infiltrate the tavern. So, for the last few days, he had been using his X-ray sight to carefully observe the tavern and its inhabitants. There were too many peculiar things going on in there that could not be explained, so the killer didn't really try. His entire focus was on finding a way to infiltrate. In the end, when he could not find a way on his own, he had to rely on one of the quest rewards he had been saving up to kill the mayor. System: prepare the death bubble. Target the highest value person in that building. Suddenly, Lex, who was busy cultivating in his room, disappeared. Chapter 357 Lucky. Lex was, as usual, cultivating in a tub of iced tea. Not only did the tea bath speed up his cultivation, it left his body smelling nice after he was done. In the past couple of weeks, his constant dedication had actually somewhat helped him make progress in the foundation realm. Today, however, while he was cultivating, he was hit with a sense of extreme danger. The danger was not external, but was a result of a disruption in his cultivation technique. Something had happened, and before he could begin to comprehend it, there was an abrupt change in the amount of spirit energy his body was absorbing, causing the cultivation technique to immediately shut down. Such a forceful interruption would normally be enough to completely rip away someone's meridians. Lex, however, managed to survive because of his incredibly sturdy body, as well as the fact that his meridians had been reforged out of metal. It still hurt like hell, though. Though he managed to survive the disruption, his sense of danger did not disappear. Lex opened his eyes to find himself in a completely foreign place. He was standing on a flat dirt road surrounded by the rubble of collapsed buildings. The sky was dark, as usual, but the familiar glint of starlight could be seen across the expanse. Lex was suddenly hit with a wave of nostalgia looking up at the heavens, but now was not the time to get lost in thought. He turned around to his left and saw nothing more than rubble. Broken pieces of stone with rusted bits of metal sticking out of them sat in piles, undisturbed in this strange place for God knows how long. But it was not the rubble that Lex was looking at. He was looking at the ground right before the rubble. No one was there, or at least, his eyes saw no one, but his gut was telling him otherwise. It told him there was a predator standing before him, and that he was in a situation he hadn't been in a long time. He was being hunted. It was like when he was chased by zombies back on Vegas Minima, or the pack of wolves back on Nibiru. But there was one stark difference between now and then. It was that he was not afraid. "How did I get here?" Lex asked, his voice calm and steady. Though he saw no one, his instincts had never been wrong before. Moreover, he had a pretty good idea of who he was about to meet. It was as if the gut feeling he had back when the lights failed was coming true. His question was followed by silence for a few moments, but eventually he got a reply. "This place is called Death Bubble. I can teleport anyone I target here, and then neither of us can leave until the other person dies." A couple of moments later, a man appeared right where Lex was looking. He was pale and lanky, with short dark hair. His thin figure made him look malnourished, but his eyes were full of life. He grinned at Lex, revealing sharpened, yellow teeth. "You're the first person to not panic at all when coming here," the murderer said in a gleeful voice. "I'm used to teleporting," Lex replied plainly. Though he was standing still, it wasn't as if he was doing nothing. Lex's mind was running as fast as it could, and he was already making plans on how to kill the other. Good, you're strong. I've never killed a brave one before. This will be a new experience. Are you so sure that I'll be the one to die, and not you?" "I'm very lucky. I wouldn't have met you if I couldn't kill you," he answered excitedly, the saliva practically dripping from his lips. Then the battle began. The murderer stood still in front of Lex's eyes, but a figure appeared behind Lex silently and tried to stab his kidney. Lex, who no longer only relied on his vision and sense of sound, was not taken by surprise and turned perfectly to avoid the dagger. At the same time, a small array of merely a few characters quickly formed in front of his left hand. Using the momentum from his turn, Lex jabbed forward with his left hand aiming at the figure's neck, a small spear-point blade of ice forming around his middle finger. The figure, which was revealed to be the murderer, was surprised and could not react fast enough to avoid the jab. But, just as the small ice blade touched the murderer's neck, something completely unexpected happened. The rubble upon which Lexus was standing came loose, causing him to suddenly slip. Lex lost his balance, causing his jab to miss and making him vulnerable once again to the killer. A grin formed on the murderer's face as he realized what had happened and swung his dagger towards Lex. But while Lex could not dodge, he was not helpless. Using his right hand, Lex used talk to the hand, forming an invisible barrier which blocked the blade. With his attack blocked, the murderer took a jump back to regroup and Lex quickly got up as well. Lex couldn't believe that he actually stumbled on some rumble. He normally wouldn't make a mistake like that. The array he used earlier was one of the quickest and easiest arrays he memorized. It absorbed the moisture in the air to form a blade that was very sharp and sturdy. but because it was a very basic array, the blade did not have a proper grip, and would only sit on his finger when attacking directly straight. If he tried a cutting or sweeping attack, the blade would fall off. Still, the lethality of the blade should not be underestimated. Moreover, this was just one of the many arrays Lex memorized. Lastly, Lex had also gone a step beyond just memorization. He had formed a very simple system of his own to help him create new arrays on the fly. Since attacking with arrays was not hampered in any way by regal embrace, Lex's lethality had shot up. Now, equipped with an arsenal of his own, Lex no longer waited for the murderer to attack again and took the initiative. 2 arrays began to quickly form, each in front of his hands. A ball of orange fire formed above his left hand, and he used his right hand to aim at the murderer. Before the murderer could even react, the ball of fire went hurtling towards him at a speed too great to avoid. This was the second time the murderer was taken by surprise, and didn't have time to react. But, by sheer coincidence, a nearby ruin that had survived the untold number of years these ruins had existed broke, stimulated by the small vibrations of their fight. The wall fell down just perfectly to block the ball of fire before it reached the murderer, causing it to explode. A cloud of dust exploded in the air, blocking Lex's sight and hiding the murderer behind its veil. When the dust cleared, the murderer had disappeared once more. Lex could temporarily not locate him, most likely because he was no longer being blatantly targeted by the murderer. He remained standing in place as he employed ripple shell in case the murderer succeeded in landing a hidden blow, all the while trying to figure out what happened. Twice he nearly killed the murderer. He wouldn't be surprised if the murderer found some way to dodge or block the attack, but strange things kept happening to protect him. Was this the murderer's doing, or were they all coincidences? How was he supposed to overcome this? A few ideas crossed Lex's mind, and he began forming one of the larger arrays he knew. It would take a few seconds to ready, during which he would not be able to block, so he needed to keep his wits about him. His back tingled and he dodged to the side once again, just in time to see the murderer glaring at him, his earlier joy gone, slashing towards him with his knife. "I will make your death slow," the murderer said between gritted teeth. He was genuinely afraid for his life for a moment. If his luck hadn't been so good, he would have died to that fireball. Angered by the retaliation, the murderer no longer cared about holding back, and used all the quest items his system had given him. It was lucky for him, they suited his attack pattern really well. The murderer kept stabbing and swiping, showing a certain degree of amateurishness in his moves. But no matter how careless he seemed, he had too many kills under his belt for Lex to take him lightly, which is why he didn't dare take on his attacks directly. Just as he was about to finish the array, he felt something stab him in the back. The sharp pain, that was far beyond anything it should have been, caused Lex to lose control of the array, causing a massive explosion. Chapter 358, Like a King. More than the heat of the flame or the roar of thunder, it was the pressure of the explosion that rocked Lex. His body shot up into the air, like a bullet, spinning and flipping like a gymnast giving his best performance. It took a few seconds before the overwhelmed and dizzy Lex found a few moments of clarity, and a few seconds more before he was able to stabilize his body. In a heartbeat, he analyzed the damage to his body, and discovered, to his great surprise, that his back was completely unharmed. There was no stab wound, and the pain had completely disappeared, as if it was only his mind. Other than that, though, he was not in his best state. The shockwave that passed through his body had rattled Lex to his bones, and though he was largely unhurt, the blatant flaw in his array plan hurt him more. Deciding not to take any more chances, Lex decided to scrap every array he planned on using that would take more than 2 seconds to form. But before he could do anything to attack the murderer, he had to ensure he landed safely. He formed quick and small arrays to immediately change his trajectory, in case the murderer had something planned for him where he would fall, and immediately slowed down his descent. But changing the direction did not work, for the moment he landed on the floor, 2 stabbing pains shot up through his feet, as if he had landed straight into 2 pikes. Despite the experience from earlier, Lex couldn't help but look down to see that his feet were completely unharmed. His back tingled, warning of an impending attack, but the pain in his feet and his knee-jerk reaction to investigate them wasted precious moments, making it so he couldn't retaliate like usual. Instead, he leaped forward and fell into a roll to get some distance. But when he turned back, the murderer was not in sight. Lex narrowed his eyes. As amateurish as he was in his attacks, the murderer wielded abilities that were genuine and quite lethal. By now Lex had understood that whenever he felt piercing pain, it was fake and served just as a distraction. But he dared not completely ignore the pain in case this was a feint, so that a real attack would follow when he learnt to expect nothing. He had also somewhat gotten used to the murderer disappearing and consistently attacking from behind him. But even that he dared not get too comfortable with either. But no matter what he did, Lex would not overcome him by waiting for him to attack first. He thought up a plan quickly and formed an array that caused fog to slowly accumulate at the knee level. This way, he'd be able to determine as soon as the attacker attempted a single attack. He also formed another array, using the low-level fog to hide a trap. But the effectiveness of the trap would depend on if the murderer continued to attack from the back, and the nature of the attack. If he had managed to bring his thinking cap with him, he would have been able to use more complex and powerful traps, but alas, life does not follow one's wishes. His back tingled once again and, to hide the existence of the trap, Lex dodged normally, and just as he turned around to look, his back tingled again. This time the attack was too fast for him to dodge even with the warning, and something slammed into his back, throwing him onto the ground. The attack was not sharp and piercing, like he had been expecting from the knife. Instead, it was a large blunt force, as if he had been hit by a beanbag or something. "You are nothing, idiot," the murderer yelled, his voice filled with both anger and jubilation. "You are nothing. You are dead. All that remains is your final struggle." Even disoriented, Lex was paying attention to his surroundings, and the moment he located the direction the sound was coming from, he fired off another fireball. But this time, no accident happened to block the attack, and the murderer himself dodged it easily. Yet when he turned to Lex to gloat, he was startled to find a flaming man walking his way. Lex had actually lit himself on fire. This was not a diversionary tactic. Instead, Lex was acting off of his instincts. He felt that some kind of goo had latched onto his body where he had been hit earlier, and the goo was alive and trying to penetrate his skin. He felt actual, genuine danger for his life from the goo. But the information provided by his instincts was jumbled and vague. He could only determine that the goo was alive, and that it would not come off his skin easily now that it had latched on. So, taking advantage of his body's toughness, Lex lit himself on fire using an array. But that was not all. More than pain, Lex felt a minor sense of humiliation at having to rely on having to light himself on fire. This feeling of humiliation came from a recent sense of pride that had planted itself in Lex as he overcame so many trials. Now this pride was fueling a flame much brighter than the one covering his body, and it sent Lex's mind into a state of overdrive. It was similar to the sense of flow that Lex used to get, but much greater, and with far fewer restrictions. Not only did his mind work faster to absorb all the information his various senses and instincts were providing him, he could almost split his mind into two. He could focus a majority of his attention on a certain task while leaving a portion of his thoughts to focus on a separate task without compromising the quality of work. Moreover, the boost in his thought process was dozens of times greater than when he used the crown made by the crystal race, or even when he used to enter the state of flow before he entered the foundation realm. This boost would have been great if Lex had anticipated it. Since Lex did not anticipate it, and was caught in the state unaware, all his extra mental energy was focused on his anger at the murderer. Lex used the technique he hadn't used a single time since he learned it, home sweet home, and, in a burst of speed, barely comprehensible, arrived before the murderer in the blink of an eye and slammed his burning body right into him. Burned and crushed, the murderer's body was flung away, but Lex caught his ankle, keeping him from flying away. With a furious bellowing roar, Lex slammed his body into the ground and put his flaming foot on his chest. He aimed his array at the murderer's face and launched a flame ball at him. But, just as the flame ball was about to hit him, the ground beneath him collapsed, revealing a sinkhole, moving his body out of the way. Lex immediately absorbed a lot of information and quickly drew the conclusion that for non-lethal attacks, there would be no accidents, but as soon as he tried to kill the murderer, something would prevent it. A few theories popped into his mind, but before he could try them out, the murderer let out an angry yelp as he dangled over the sinkhole and disappeared right from within his hand. Lex squinted his eyes as he drew another conclusion. The murderer was not turning invisible, but disappearing entirely, or teleporting somewhere else. Lex formed 2 more arrays, entirely ignoring the fact that he was still on fire and the goo that had latched onto his shoulder had been completely burned off by now. The 2 arrays took him 2.4 seconds to form, even in his overdrive state. But, once they were completed, a surge of spiritual energy started flowing around him, spinning in a circle. His burning body acted like a flint, and lit up the energy into a fiery tornado that began expanding outwards, quickly burning everything it touched. This attack would reveal the limitations of the murderer's teleportation if there were any. Well, it could not entirely test the limitation of his ability, but Lex would eliminate them one by one. In only a few moments, the tornado had spread across half the visible land and continued to grow when, spontaneously and without warning, a burning meteor fell from the sky. The meteor crashed into the ground some distance from Lex, causing a massive explosion that startled even Lex. He quickly deployed Talk to the Hand, using both his hands to block the aftermath of the clash between the fiery tornado and meteor. Cracks formed in the invisible shield, but it ultimately held until the force of the explosion passed, leaving in its wake a site fit for Armageddon. Only 2 small patches of land seemed unharmed, one behind Lex's shield, and another, conveniently blocked by a massive rock that jutted into the ground. Behind that rock stood the murderer, panting and in pain. Though his ears were ringing, the murderer managed to hear a small sound. When he looked up to investigate, he saw a flaming Lex, looking down at him from the top of the rock, like a king about to sentence one to death. Chapter 359 Beatdown. Before the murderer could cry out or yell, Lex smashed his body into him using Home Sweet Home once again. The fire on Lex's body had gone out, but the one in his heart was raging on as he continued to attack relentlessly. Letting go of arrays, Lex used his bare fists to beat his body into submission. Since fatal attacks would trigger the coincidences, Lex aimed only to cripple him. Punch after punch landed on the murderer's skinny body, breaking it bit by bit. Compared to other body cultivators, Lex's strength may not be as impressive, but to a person who was not a body cultivator, each of Lex's punches was like being smashed by a wrecking ball. Unable to retaliate or even avoid, the murderer disappeared once again. But the ruins had been completely destroyed by the blast, eliminating all hiding spots. The moment Lex climbed up onto the big rock, he could easily see the collapsed body of the murderer in the distance. Not interested in giving him any time to retaliate, Lex dashed towards him once again. But the murderer had been pushed to the brink of desperation by Lex's relentless assault, and he began mindlessly using anything and everything in his arsenal. A blue bubble appeared around his body just in time to stop Lex, causing him to crash headfirst into it. Unable to stop in time, Lex's body hit the bubble hard, and fell back with a strong rebound. His nose broke and started bleeding. Even in his state of anger, a part of himself could not stop himself from commenting on the irony that the greatest wounds he'd suffered so far were self-inflicted. The murderer was not interested in Lex's self-depreciation as he began to spend his murder points, or MP, to buy everything available to him. Mannequins started appearing out of thin air, all holding blades similar to the murderer, all looking at Lex with dark eyes. When 109 such mannequins appeared, they attacked Lex in unison. Their coordination was immaculate, and it was as if a higher power was controlling each of their movements. Each of their attacks were smoother and deadlier than the murderer's, though Lex could detect a hint of similarity in their attack patterns. Still, none of it mattered. Something as simple and straightforward as physical attacks could not overwhelm Lex unless there was a massive difference in speed and strength, which there was not. Guided by his instincts, Lex dodged so smoothly and seemingly effortlessly that were anyone to see it, it would seem that Lex and the mannequins were working together to purposefully avoid him. It was like he decided where he would move to dodge before they even decided to attack, and it was more or less exactly what was happening. This was a result of a flaw due to how perfect their coordination was. That perfect coordination made it so that their next moves became predictable, even to the point where, in his overdrive state, Lex was able to determine what would happen 4 or 5 moves ahead. Lex was moving as fast as he possibly could, but at the same time he was under no pressure. This allowed him to begin forming arrays to deal with the mannequins. But the murderer was not done either, as he had killed enough people to accumulate quite a bit of MP. A mannequin was hovering over him, healing his broken body while 2, much more intimidating ones stood around him as guards. Moreover, armor filled with metal spikes slowly appeared around the murderer's body. At a small distance, dirt from the ground was automatically piling up on itself, forming some kind of massive monster. Up in the sky, the starlight was blocked by thunder clouds that were beginning to form. All of this was taken in by Lex, even though he was busy dodging the mannequins. He did not know how the murderer was suddenly doing all these things, but it was best to let him fully prepare. His mind went through the various arrays he memorized, but none were suitable for the situation. He also didn't want to risk using evisceration, as while he had increased his mastery over the technique, with the unusual coincidences happening, Lex didn't want to risk it. If the coincidence went from blocking the attack to somehow interrupting Lex's evisceration, the result would be catastrophic. He took a deep breath just as the arrays he was forming ended. The ground trembled and hundreds of sharp earthen spikes erupted from the ground, impaling most of the mannequins. It was time to employ the rest of Lex's preparation with arrays. The conundrum of forming new arrays to match various situations was an extremely difficult one. If he had time it was not an issue, but in the heat of battle it was not possible. So, Lex found a loophole using his knowledge of programming, and the unique connecting method employed in the crystal realm for their arrays. It would somewhat diminish the power of the arrays, but it was good enough as it provided versatility. Lex memorized over 100 extremely small arrays that performed very simple and basic tasks. He originally wanted to call them functions, but ended up just calling them letters. The reason for this was because the concept he was working towards was combining the various small arrays in the way letters combine to form words, and then words combine to form sentences. Combining the so-called letters was still not exactly straightforward, for even language has rules about how the alphabets behave, let alone something as complex as arrays. Yet the concept of joining many small arrays to form one big array was too attractive to overlook, and much easier to design. What he needed now was immense, concentrated firepower, and so he began forming just such an array. At his current speed, within 1 second he could form up to 10 mini-arrays with the function of gathering heat. For the array he had planned he would need hundreds of such arrays, so he couldn't wait and began immediately. A few seconds went by when the murderer realized that Lex was not attacking, as he usually did, and was instead preparing something. Attack, he roared to his final 2 mannequins that acted as his bodyguards, as well as the arachnid-shaped dirt monster. Attack! 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 Kill him for me! A sharp, piercing pain stabbed him directly through the eyes and into his brain, but Lex did not even flinch in his overdrive state. Pain meant absolutely nothing to him right now. The mannequins reached him in the blink of an eye, these ones armed with a sword and shield each. They were also much faster, and much stronger than the previous ones. Truly, they were formidable foes. Well, they were formidable if their opponent wasn't Lex. With the forewarning from his instincts, Lex dodged each attack easily. In fact, Lex did not even look away from the murderer as he casually avoided each swing of the mannequin's sword. The dirt monster, 12 feet, 3.65 meters, tall, also arrived and started smashing at Lex with its numerous legs. It was not as fast as the other 2, but it was much stronger. Dirt and rubble flew into the air under the explosion caused by its massive legs, yet Lex was as elusive as the wind. A hint of fear crept into the murderer's mind as he observed Lex, who never broke eye contact. But the fear was followed quickly by madness. He joined his hands together, forming a strange symbol, and began reciting some unusual prayer. From the moment he uttered the first syllable, Lex felt the danger around him increase, and he knew he could waste no more time. Whatever he was doing had to be stopped. But his array was not ready either. It would take a few more seconds. The duel suddenly turned into a lethal waiting game, and whoever struck first would gain the advantage. Normally Lex might have felt nervous under so much pressure, but his overdrive state allowed him maximum control of his every thought. Nervousness was not a useful emotion right now, so it would never be activated. Of course, a part of his also had to do with the fact that Lex's mind had been flooded with pride and anger. Just as 2 seconds were all that remained for Lex's array to be complete, he dodged his attackers and rushed towards the murderer. A monster that had previously not existed suddenly appeared in front of Lex, blocking him. Unwilling to change his actions, Lex used Home Sweet Home and continued in a straight line. Either he would tear through the monster's body, or take him along with him. But how could a monster formed from dirt be sturdy enough to block Lex? Bursting right through the monster's chest, Lex appeared before the blue bubble that blocked the murderer and aimed his right palm at him. Even Lex was interested to see what kind of coincidence could block him now. Time seemed to freeze as the murderer looked at Lex's palm. He forgot that he was wearing special armor, and even forgot that he could do something to move. The sight of Lex bursting directly through the body of a monster to approach his bubble was seared into his brain. Though the monster was made of dirt, when dirt was compacted enough it was not easy, or simple, to break through it. Then there was the look in his eyes. The disdain in his eyes was as clear as day, and the murderer was spellbound. He could look nowhere else. They were eyes that told him that no amount of luck could deter him. No amount of help from his system was enough. No sword was fast enough or strong enough. They were eyes that told him death was nigh. The murderer's mind collapsed, but there was not enough time to show it. A bright, yellow light shone out of Lex's palm. The next moment, a beam of yellow light with a 10 feet, 3 meter, diameter was launched out of Lex's hand. It was silent. There was no loud bang, no sonic booms. Moreover, there was no sound of a collision, or something crashing. One moment all was well, and the next a massive yellow beam seemed to appear, and traveled to infinity. From afar, it actually looked pleasant. Nearby, however, anyone would be too distracted by the searing, immolating heat the beam gave off. When the light disappeared, everything that had been in its path disappeared. Even the ground disappeared perfectly in the shape of the circular beam of light where the light touched it, its cooked edges slowly giving off smoke. The attack had been the most devastating that Lex had ever released, clearing almost everything in its path. Almost because a single figure fell to the ground when the light disappeared. The armor the murderer had been wearing had melted into a puddle and had been blown away, yet the murderer had survived because of a protective amulet he had been wearing on his person. The amulet, through some unusual coincidence, had been specifically made to protect from heat-based attacks, and had been used up entirely to protect the murderer. Lex was not disappointed to see the murderer survive. He felt nothing. No matter how many times he avoided death, all Lex had to do was try again. Wasting no time, Lex arrived in front of the murderer and lifted him by the throat. The murderer was unresponsive, for his mind had collapsed due to fear. Lex ripped off his shirt and removed any and all jewelry or talismans he wore to further reduce his chances of survival. It was much easier now that the murderer was simply limp. Once he was sure the murderer had nothing else on his body, Lex punched his face, completely determined to kill him with that hit. A bolt of lightning fell from the sky, landing directly on Lex's crown, paralyzing him and preventing him from completing his punch. Oddly enough, the lightning did not affect the murderer. When Lex recovered he tried again, but the unusual land they were in experienced an earthquake, causing Lex to stumble. He tried again and cramped in the foot. He tried again and a massive gale started, pushing Lex to the ground. He tried again and darkness fell, causing him to miss. He tried again, his expression constant throughout. He was Lex freaking Williams, and even an act of God, or several acts, would save the murderer from him after crossing him. Serene Williams, mother of Lex Williams, trembled as she looked at the person who arrived on the planet. It was her eldest daughter, Belle. Her face was as expressionless and cold as ever, and only the fierce determination in her eyes set her apart from an emotionless doll. The silence echoed through the hall as the two marinated in the tumultuous emotions that filled this moment. Finally, unable to control herself, Serene opened her mouth to speak, but Belle beat her to it. I've officially graduated from Ventura Gold, but I have no intentions of continuing on to Ventura itself. After trying to speak and failing multiple times, all Serene could say was, How? How could I not? I had the love and affection of my parents supporting me. All that was left was to break through my limits time and time again, use all the resources available to me, and steal the ones that weren't, and force myself into the immortal realm. Even as she said this, and hinted at the grave dangers she faced all without informing her family, her expression remained impassive as ever. And you're leaving Ventura to go back to them? It is my duty and my place. I do not need the honor given to me as a birthright. I will take it on my own. You do not know the full story. They will kill your brother if they ever meet him. They are not the angels that they claim. Even better then, that I become sovereign of the William family then, isn't it? I can then protect my baby brother with my own hands. You do not understand. Enough, said Belle firmly. I am not here for this. I only came to let you know that I have become immortal, and to ask you a question. Will you continue to create a cultivation technique tailored to me, or shall I go to the family and take a complete one on my own? There was a painful moment of silence before Serene's eyes also became determined. Belle was always like this, from the time she was a baby. If she could not prevent her from taking this path, all she could do was help her. I'll continue to create a technique for you, she said, her voice regaining the command normally embedded in a parent's voice. But since you are determined to take your own path, do not blame others for doing so as well. If you change your name to Evangeline, then your father's sword will be drawn before it's time. You know how he is about these things. Now come, explain your breakthrough to me thoroughly. We need to establish what tenets your future cultivation will be based on. No child of mine will ever cultivate a subpar technique, it needs to be perfect. Despite her usual impassiveness, Belle could not help her lip twitching at her mother's comments. Only she, Serene Williams, could call the cultivation technique provided at the Ventura Academy and Williams family subpar. After all, as far as humans were concerned, no one could form a better cultivation technique than her. Even her own father gave up his entire cultivation to start again under her guidance. Although his cultivation realm was now much lower than what it once was, no one dared to test his sword. No one. A beaten and battered Lex punched the murderer once again. It was ridiculous that the murderer himself had not been able to hurt Lex, yet the unusual coincidences had him drenched in his own blood. But even then, it was just to the extent of spilling a little blood. Whether it was earthquakes, tornadoes, lightning strikes, meteors, collapsing buildings, sudden cramps, loss of control of spiritual energy, and even a minor heart attack, Lex remained undeterred. He was genuinely amazed that even his body was susceptible to these coincidences. He really wanted to understand what was the cause, but he wanted to kill the murderer even more. Moreover, while the attacks his body suffered were lethal for normal people, to him they were not but minor inconveniences. He could live for hours and hours even if his heart completely stopped beating, so a small heart attack was nothing. Due to the resilience of his meridians, the loss of control of spiritual energy was even less dangerous. Of course, if the coincidences became too dangerous, he would stop. For now though, they were within an acceptable range. But, the next moment, though he was not expecting it, nothing stopped his fist from connecting to the murderer's face. His end was quite abrupt and gruesome. Lex suddenly left the overdrive state and was hit by the urge to wipe his hand. Not to be graphic, but not much remained of the murderer's face at all, simply because Lex had used too much strength. Much of it had been blown away, but some of it was still stuck to Lex's hand. He did not know when or how he would return, as apparently he would be sent back after one of them died, but then, something unexpected happened. He heard the familiar sound of a notification from his system. System notification. New system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Murder system grade D+ detected. Host can choose to assimilate with the secondary system and have two concurrent systems, or absorb it to strengthen the existing system. Please note, this decision will be fixed and final, and will result in the same action for all subsequent systems discovered.